Hey guys, how are we? Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Kind of wanted to finish up on this Chandler Halderson trial. I don't think we'll do the sentencing today. We'll do this. We'll go up to today we're going to do just closing arguments and then also the verdict reading. Want to go over his charges really quick though. As you can see here, there was 8 separate charges, and first degree intentional homicide, false info on kidnapping a missing person, mutilating a corpse, hiding a corpse, first degree intentional homicide, false info on kidnapping. So they did those twice, right? They did 2 charges. And the reason I'm telling you this is because this is going to come up in a little bit here. So they charged him twice for false info on kidnapping or missing persons, reporting missing persons, and also twice on mutilating a corpse and hiding a corpse. So we'll get to that in just a little bit. But he's got 2 charges also, one each for his mom and his dad for first degree intentional homicide. So let's go over the timeline really quick for those of you that have not been watching and kind of get up to par on what's going on here. On August 25th, they filed the charges for Krista because at that point, that's the mother. They had found her remains, or some of her remains. They have still not found all of her. He came into court on the 28th for the very first time, and then they found some more remains on. Well, I want to go back to the first. I'm reading this backwards, I guess. July 1st was when they were last seen. The police believe that he committed the homicides either on the 1st or the 2nd. They're leaning more towards the 1st. And then, of course, he reported them missing on July the 7th when things started to get heated because people were asking about him, including their coworkers and whatnot. And then there was the father's remains were first found at that area. Bruiser says hello, everybody. His father's remains were found at that area of his girlfriend's mother's girlfriend. And then also that was on the 12th. And then 2 days later, they found some remains of the mother because they reported that they had seen somebody strange walking around that area. And of course, it all connected back to Chandler. So that's where we are so far. I'm checking in with the chat just to say hello to everybody. How are y'all? Good to see everybody. Glad you guys are here with me tonight. Once we finish this, we'll do some Judge Tammy on some live streams. I think that would be fun. I've been clipping a lot of her stuff, and she is hilarious. Did they deny his appeal? Yes, they did, Kimmy. They sure did. All right, so let's go on to the closing arguments. Take this down. Okay.
Good morning. I always start my closing arguments in the same way. And it's simply this. If any of the attorneys, either throughout the trial or during closings today, from either side, myself, Mr. Brown, or the defense, misstate a fact or evidence, you should go with your collective memories. You guys are the jury. We've sat with this case for months, had meetings about it, talked about it, read things about it, and sometimes not intentionally, but sometimes people, misremember something or think of one thing they read. So please use your collective memories as jurors to determine what you heard and what you saw. Additionally, it should be the written law that the judge just read and that you will get a copy of that should determine how you process and think of the law. For years, I've listened to attorneys where prosecutors have basically belittled the burden of proof and where the defense has built it up to be something that can never be overcome or could only be overcome by video. Neither of those things are true. You should look at the written law and follow the written law. Second thing I want to say is I want to apologize for all the graphic photos that you folks had to look at the last 3 weeks. I'm sorry I had to show them to you. But we had to. They were part of a crime. And because of the charges and what we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, it was necessary for you to look at some of those photos. I will promise, though, today I will not be showing you those anymore. There will be none of those photos in my closing. So every case that comes in is kind of like a puzzle. You have to look at it because obviously you weren't there. But, solving a case and thinking about whether or not a person is guilty or not guilty is like putting together a puzzle. And it's your job as the jury to put that puzzle together. But the question in this case, or why this case is kind of unique, is the person who committed the crime had 8 days to spread the pieces of that puzzle all over the state of Wisconsin, or at least southern Wisconsin. Now, what are the pieces of those puzzle? They're evidence. What is evidence? It's what you saw in this courtroom and what you heard in this courtroom, testimony. People sitting on the witness stand and telling you what they knew. Before we start off going through that evidence, I want to remind you of the background of the events before July 1st of 2021. In June of 2021, Bart and Krista Halderson lived at 4595 Oak Springs Circle with their son, Chandler Halderson. And at that time in June, they thought that their son had an internship with American Family, although there was problems with the payment. He hadn't been working there about 6-7 months, hadn't been paid yet. They thought their son was attending MATC, that he had already earned a solar certificate there, and that he was enrolled in the IT program and was 1 class away from graduating. They also thought that he was going to soon be going to a job in Titusville, Florida at SpaceX. Now, things became a little suspicious to the father, Bart Halderson, who's an accountant. He's wondering, why is a Fortune 500 company not paying my son when he's working there? And for over a year, he was talking to various people at Madison College or MATC about why he hadn't gotten his son's transcripts, why they couldn't get a meeting, why he hadn't received his solar certificate. He had been emailing with these 3 people, Aaron Hoover, Daniel Spieth, and Alyssa Brandt, and been communicating with them. This all kind of comes to a crescendo or to a head the day before Bart is murdered. And on that day, he has a phone call with Omar Job. He starts off this phone call, you can just tell in his voice, he's angry, because he thinks this college has been giving him and his son the runaround for about a year. They're not doing their job. And so he's kind of aggressive at the beginning of this call. You don't really like him until you know the whole story. And he learns during this call that his son has never earned a solar certificate, that his son is not enrolled in the IT program, that his son owes the college over $1,000, and that Alyssa Brandt, Aaron Hoover, and Daniel Spieth have never worked for Madison College. We see, and that is the background that lead us into the events of July 1st, 2021. On that day is started by Chandler messaging his girlfriend. 7:26 a.m., I hardly slept. 7:27 a.m., I don't know, stuff really hasn't been going well for me lately. So I'm trying to plan for the next thing to fuck me over. We know at 7:27 a.m., his mom leaves for work. She works customer service at Zimbrick. She heads to work. We then know at 7:51 a.m., Chandler messages his girlfriend, yeah, I had a great future planned and it's falling apart. Now, what does he know at this point? His dad does send him a text message the day before saying, I spoke to Omar Job. I honestly don't know if that meant anything to Chandler or not, but things are coming to a crescendo. And what we do know is he texts his girlfriend at 1:04 p.m. I overheard that they may go to the cabin with their friends, and I don't know, but I don't know. We also know that on Bart's work calendar, he has a meeting with Chandler and MATC. I don't know if Bart confronted him the night before. I don't know if Bart was going to see how long this ruse or how elaborate this ruse was going to get. But this topic was going to be discussed, and there would be a coming to terms. We know that at 2:10 p.m., Bart texts Chandler, "I'm ready whenever you are." What happened next? Well, we'll look at the evidence. There's a spent shell casing in the basement of the home. There's a bullet fragment, noticeable reddish brown staining, also tests positive for Bart's DNA. That's the bullet that went through and through Bart. The spent casing, and that casing tested positive as being shot from the rifle that belonged to Chandler. We know that Chandler got this rifle about 2 weeks prior, and it was found in the barn on Irwin Road. We know that he got it from his friend Smith, and he was given a bunch of ammo. We also see evidence in the basement of a divot from ricochet, a fresh divot. Also blood, a quadrillion times more likely to be Bart than any other unknown person. More blood. And we know that Chandler texted his mom this: "Dad's phone died. Text or call me." Remember, Dad's phone had a charger right there on the desk. You can plug your phone in and within 10 seconds send a text message. I think here there's a half-truth. Dad's dead. Dad died. Oh, and get me soda on your way home. I have an extra hour of work. We know Chandler didn't have a job. He's stalling. Get his mom to take more time. "Okay, I can," she says, smiley face. We know that she returns to the house at 5:12 p.m. We also know that her blood is found in the basement as well. And at 5:11 p.m., Chandler starts writing the following note: "Weekend chores, H2O2 and lemon." So that's hydrogen peroxide, which cleans up blood, and lemon, which is a deodorizer. Door handles, move your shit upstairs, get a job. Interesting, if he would have just gotten a job, he wouldn't have had to do the prior 3. And clean the floor. That came back in a search warrant for his Google account. We also know at 7:49 p.m., he's in the shower FaceTiming his girlfriend. So he cleans up. He then departs at 8:16 that night for Quit Trip. We see him there at the Quit Trip. There's the Volvo, there he is. He buys 20 pounds of ice. He arrives back home at 8:29 p.m. Then we know that somewhere between 8:30 and 9:30, the neighbor, Steve Greiber, smells a weird burning, a pungent burning that he describes like a pig roast. And you heard testimony from Fire Inspector Bill Boswell that unfortunately in his line of work, he's come across many burned bodies, human bodies, and that they do in fact smell like a pig roast. Moving on to Friday, July 2nd. We know throughout that night, and I'm not re-showing this video, but there's hours of this video. We know that we see burning in the fireplace and the garage light go on and off. All throughout the night. There it is, almost 3 a.m. Until at one point it kind of crescendos and dies down. We also know, looking at the living room of the Halderson home, that right there by the fireplace is a measuring tape. Folks, he measured the parts of the body to see if they were small enough to fit into the fireplace. And a fan, add oxygen.
Oh
to
my
that fire, make it
gosh.
burn a little bit hotter. We know that it burned hot enough that it damaged the fireplace. The door shattered and the paint is visibly peeling and bubbling. We also know that there's blood evidence. Evidence of cleanup from the luminol photos, as well as droplets
Oh
of
my
blood.
gosh.
We know that those stains test positive for blood and that they test positive for Bart and Krista's DNA. There is also some DNA from Chandler. He did cut his foot. We're not disputing that, but he cut his foot in the process of dismembering and blowing and burning his parents, not from playing ball with the dogs.
Thank you. Hello.
More blood. That's also Dad. And of course, on top of this fireplace that then is made to look all pristine with papers that date to June 23rd, not in the winter from when you would have last actually had a real fire, but from June 23rd, there's a piece of skull. And so Dr. Christina Figueroa Soto gets involved in this case. And she finds bones. She finds lots of bones. They go into this ash trap. I had never even heard of an ash trap before. Clearly, neither had Mr. Halderson. But they find a total of 230 bone fragments. She's able to say 106 of them were substantial enough that she's able to say what they were, that they were human and what parts of the body they're from.
Oh, wow. I didn't pick that up
53
earlier.
from the skull or cranium, 18 from the hands, 24 teeth, 8 vertebrae, 3 long bones, either from arms or legs.
Oh my gosh.
There's also evidence in the garage. We have blood staining on shoes. That blood staining tests positive for both Bart and Krista and is identified as blood, not just touch DNA. More staining on the shoes, Bart. And in the shoes, they test the inside of the shoes as well to see whose shoes these belong to. They're Chandler's. They're his size 10 and a half. Oh, and he's wearing them right there. Those are the shoes he wore. In the garage, there's an axe found. And there's blood staining on this axe. It's positive for human blood on the hilt. It's positive for human blood on the head. On the head of the axe is both Bart and Krista's DNA. On the hilt is both Bart and Krista's DNA. And look at those numbers. A quadrillion times more likely to be those two than an unknown person. That's 1,000 times the world's population. And on the handle, Bart and Krista's DNA as well. We know at 7:02 a.m. morning, that's a Friday morning of a holiday weekend, okay? July 3rd, Friday morning, a 23-year-old at 7:02 a.m. gets up, drives to Fleet Farm. Again, wearing those shoes, buys a tarp. There's that tarp, 6x8. That tarp is later found in a trash bin at the Irwin Road property out in the woods.
That's where his dad was found.
He returns home at 7:31. And we see the following, throughout the day, we see the following text messages between him and his girlfriend. We're set for this. We just need ice. And now hydrogen peroxide, because I stepped on glass. Later, there's more talk, whether she will come or not. But if your mom has an extra bottle, that'd be great. And a Swiffer wet jet. Okay, I do kind of, and there's more talk about whether or not Kat will be there and what time. And Chandler responds, okay, I do kind of need the Swiffer and the peroxide and stuff. Oh, and remember ice. Didn't he just buy 20 pounds of ice less than 12 hours earlier? But he needs more ice. What does he need that ice for? Well, the fireplace broke. We know there's a freezer. He bought lots of ice, and that freezer tested positive for human blood. Parts of his mom and his dad were put in that freezer. We know that night on the 2nd, one of Krista's coworkers, Daniel Croninger, came to the house. He had heard that day that Krista no-called and no-showed for work, and that is not the Krista he knew. She had worked there for several years, had never done that before, just not the type of person she was. I mean, of course, I never met her, but she seems a little type A. Like, she liked things to be in order, liked things to be a certain way, and was responsible. So he comes over, and Chandler begins to tell the tale of, yeah, they went up to the cabin. They left this morning with some mystery couple. You know, she probably just forgot to take off, even though her boss testified that she would often take off a year in advance and get the dates right, and had dates planned out in the future. But Daniel seems to be somewhat satisfied with that. Here's the problem. Krista's phone is responding to towers in her house. She didn't go anywhere. She never left that house. There are cameras on every side of that house. We know when Krista went in, and we never see her leave. This is not a whodunit, folks. That house is surrounded by cameras. We know who came and left. And we know that her phone was found in a shoe, hidden under a shelf, behind other shoes, wrapped in tinfoil, wrapped in a paper towel. Dan leaves about 10 minutes later after talking with Chandler, and Kat arrives and spends the night. And they spend the night on this couch fort. You probably thought, why are they putting in evidence about that? Who cares where they slept? This is why it's important. A normal bed, a queen size, is about 5 feet wide. 2 people can sleep there really comfortably, and for the most part, not disturb one another, unless you're a rather light sleeper. But Chandler has a problem. He has body parts in the basement of his home, in the freezer. What if Kat gets a hankering for some ice cream and goes in there like she had before? He needs to be able to control her that night. He needs to be able to know if she wakes up and where she goes if she does. So he builds this, a thing that has walls where you really can't get in and out of it gracefully. It's his way to know where she's at. I'm not sure if his girlfriend realizes how lucky she actually is.
I know, right, Patty?
Saturday, July 3rd, 2021. Kat leaves at 6:55 a.m. She has a job. And we know at 7:47 a.m., Chandler is once again up and leaving the house, headed for Roxbury. How do we know that he's headed for Roxbury? His Snapchat shows him there. Kat kind of keeps track of Chandler's location, and they snap each other all the time. She finds him there. His phone also puts him there. And he's quite close to where the remains were found. We also know that is an area he frequented. That's a picture of him about a year before, standing there with a knife. And that white tent in the background, that's where they found Mom's legs. Dr. Rogalska performed the autopsy of the legs. And there's only certain things she can tell us from the limited amount of human body remaining that she was able to do an autopsy of. She can say that Chandler Halderson was dismembered post-mortem, so after death. She also, looking at a totality of the circumstances, puts the cause of death as homicidal violence. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot tell you if Krista was shot, strangled, stabbed, or something else. I can't. What I can tell you is we have 5 bullets missing from a magazine, and we know that Bart Halderson was shot 2 or 3 times. So there are 2 missing bullets, but I don't know if she was shot. What I do know is she entered the house, and it was only Bart and Chandler there. No one else. She died of homicidal violence. manner of death, homicide. And those are legal documents that the ME has to put these determinations on. We know that Chandler arrives back home at 9:31 a.m.
Thank you, Manfundo.
Later that day, he goes to Dulce's house, and he returns at 3:07 p.m. And that night, though, we know he leaves his house at 10:08 p.m. And we know he goes up to Portage along the Wisconsin River. From his house to Portage and back. He's up in the Portage area from at least 10:37 p.m. to 11:03 p.m. Portage is along the Wisconsin River. We tried to search that area. Wisconsin River has a very strong current. People drown there every year. We never find their bodies, and their bodies are whole. They attempted a dive. It was unsafe. We didn't find any evidence there. But I think in the totality of the circumstances, that wasn't a nighttime trip to go swimming. We know he returns at 11:30 p.m. And then we go on to July 4th. July 4th is actually the day that is the most eerie to me, because it's like Chandler Halderson pushed pause on his crime and just lived a normal life for a day. On July 4th, he spends the day with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's family. He goes to the farm, uses the pool, eats dinner, they have some sort of barbecue, and he asks permission to return the next day and use the pool. On that day, he does do one thing concerning his crime. Oh, and then he goes to fireworks that night at Dan Croninger's house. He does send this text message that he says tells everyone is from his mom. And it is made from mom's phone, that again is in the house, in shoes, hiding in the garage. Made it safely. Can't get anything through. And yes, it's packed. Going to White Lake today for the parade. We'll be home Monday night or Tuesday early. Love you lots. Mom ended a lot of her text messages to Chandler. Love you lots. Couple problems with the text message. First, the parade was on Saturday, not Sunday. Second, the phone never leaves Windsor, Wisconsin. Monday, July 5th. We know that Kat had stayed over the night before, and she leaves at 7:47. We know that that day is supposedly Chandler's big doctor appointment at 2 p.m. We know that it's at a UW clinic on Park Street because there's conversation between Kat and Chandler about her potentially taking him, trying to get off of work, and she actually Googles the directions. Here's his text messages to her. Made it a bit ago and checked in. This is at 2:09. Just need you to know because I have horrible reception. 2:22. No connection to even load Snapchat. 2:24. And no Wi-Fi. 2:24. What UW clinic doesn't have Wi-Fi? They took an X-ray and CT scan. Nothing bad on the X-ray. CT scan, hun. They haven't determined anything, but with my legs, like they were, and I gotta wait to hear what they determined. Chandler never went to any doctor's appointment. He's at home, sending these text messages to his girlfriend, keeping up his ruse.
Hi, Casey.
Nowhere close to Madison, certainly not on Park Street. He does leave the house, though, that day. At 4:30 p.m., he goes to the farm. We know about that. He leaves a voicemail for Cress, and then him and Cress end up having an interaction. And there's this whole conversation about using the pool. We also hear from both Cress and Dulce that they went by the pool, and there was no Chandler. So they take their little lawnmower. What did Dulce say? Granny's on a lawnmower. And they ride to where his car is. and the back is up, the trunk door, the hatch. And no Chandler, it's by the wood line. They see Chandler at some point kind of exit from the wood line. And indeed, his phone does have him there. And Cress is concerned enough. She thinks something's happening. I don't think she thought this, but she thought something was happening. So she asks the deputies to come take a look out in the woods there. So Brent Baverstock comes. He sees turkey vultures. He knows what he's about to find. He probably thinks he's going to find a whole body, but he knows what he's about to find. And there was Bart Halderson's torso. Dr. Breslauer did the autopsy of Bart's torso. She said he had at least 2 gunshot wounds, possibly 3. She couldn't tell because some of the deterioration of the muscle, whether or not it was like 1 wound tract or 2. So at least 2, but maybe 3. That he was shot in the back at least twice. That there was bullet material located in his body, and that 1 shot was a contact wound. The muzzle of the gun was touching his skin on the back. This wasn't a, oops, the gun went off. This is a, got you. You're dead.
That's awful.
Cause of death, gunshot wounds. Manner of death, homicide. Can't shoot yourself in the back. So deputies begin to search this property. It's a vast property, maybe about 45 acres. A lot of it's prairie, a lot of it's woods. But they find this oil drum that has this weird cutout. And so they look in there and they find tools. And those tools then are tested by the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. The all-way handsaw has human blood identified as Bart and Krista. The broken saw blade has blood. It's Bart's. The scissors has blood, Bart and Krista's. And again, look at those numbers, 1,000 times the world's population. There's also some pruning shears. Again, tested positive for human blood, Bart and Krista.
Good gracious.
And the head had Bart. Some of these tools were then sent to Dr. Figueroa Soto. And she did a detailed analysis, and she sat and she talked a lot about, well, things I don't really understand. But here's the basics of what I understood and what her reports say. Is that this always saw has a certain number of teeth per inch. This broken handsaw has a certain number of teeth per inch. She can look microscopically at the wounds and tell us what tools are consistent with the markings that she saw.
Can you imagine
On
using
Bart
that?
Halderson, his 4th cervical vertebrae is consistent with the broken handsaw. That's the tool that Chandler used to cut off his dad's head.
Jesus.
And of course, that handsaw, or that blade, has DNA parts. Tools used to dismember Bart Halderson: the right humerus, consistent with that all-way super saw, right femur, consistent with the all-way super saw, and left femur, consistent with the all-way super saw. That's that saw. Again, has Bart's DNA and blood. Analyst McMahon from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab also looked at some of these items found on the Earlwyn Road farm. She looked at that saw blade and she compared it to the saw handle found in the garage of the Halderson home. And she did what she does. She took some measurements, puts things precisely, and found that they were a match, that those items fit. She put together 2 puzzle pieces. An item from Earlwyn Road matched an item in the garage of the Halderson home. She also took a look at the tarp in the garbage can. And there's a couple links back to the house with this garbage can. There's an extra lid to a garbage can up in that room that was, I think, at one time a bathroom and that they were remodeling. And there's also a matching sort of container in the garage. Inside of that container found on the farm is a piece of yellow duct tape. That duct tape had blood. That was Bart Halderson's. On that tarp inside of that trash bin, there's more yellow tape. More yellow tape. And there's yellow duct tape found at the house. So Analyst McMahon pieced these together microscopically to see if they were a match. And she looked at them and found that they were all one continuous piece of tape. That's the tape he wrapped around the tarp to seal up his dad's torso.
How are they going to dispute these charges?
That torso also had Bart and Krista's DNA on it and tested positive for blood. Analyst Matson looked at some various items from the farm as well. She looked at that same tarp and found a fingerprint from Chandler. Now remember, that tarp we have Chandler buying at Fleet Farm. It would have been bought and packaged with no fingerprints on it. Here we find it covered in blood with his fingerprint. She also looked at that tarp that was in that bin and looked at it for footwear impression analysis. Could she see some prints on it, and can we match those up to some shoes? Maybe that'll help us figure out who that is, who was on that tarp. She's able to match it up to Brooks 5 launch shoes. A pair of Brooks 5 launch shoes in a size 10.5 were found in the Halderson garage. Again, those are the same ones that have blood on them and that Chandler's wearing in that video. A second tarp was found in the barn. It is an older tarp. They tried to do footwear analysis on it, came back to a Ralph Polo shoe. We never found one of those. But again, that's an older tarp. We don't know if possibly it was before the homicides or after, or if there was a pair of shoes that were ditched somewhere. But that tarp, once again, is covered in blood that tests positive for both Bart and Krista. Now, you saw a picture of Bart working on that tarp. What you didn't see on that tarp was a bunch of blood stains, because they weren't there. This blood is from this crime. Chandler gets home from the farm at 8:54 in the evening, after going to the farm and later having dinner with Kat. But that night, he's not done. Early in the morning of the 6th, we see the fireplace burning more. Not as great as before, but some burning. We also see that garage light go on and off, on and off. I think it's a total of 7 times, Deputy Wilk. And that's throughout the night. And we know at 4:30 that morning, Chandler leaves and goes into Madison. We know he goes into Madison from his phone records. We don't know what he did there, but we do know it was a trip that started out in the dark. We know he didn't have a job. And we know Madison's surrounded by lakes.
I love how she said that. You know he didn't have a job.
Wednesday, July 7th. We know the Subaru departs at 9:36 and that Chandler goes to the farm. We know he goes to the farm from both his phone records, but also from this text exchange with Kat. Kat texts Chandler asking where he's going, and he replies, farm, but no one here, so leaving. We also know that out in the farm was found a Target bag that had been at Chandler's house. How do we know that? Because it has Kat's name on it from the pickup order of the stuff she brought over to Chandler's house, she testified about. That bag is full of bloody rags. We heard from Cress, those aren't from her house, and Catherine, that those aren't her rags. Chandler took a bag full of bloody rags, disposed of it at the farm, and a bag with Kat's name on it. And those tested positive for blood, but were not suitable for DNA testing. He comes back to his house after being at the farm, and he leaves and he goes and reports his parents missing at the police department. So he reports his parents missing. Later that evening, he has a couple visitors. There's close family friends, the Hilgendorfs, and there's two girls that are about the same age as the Halderson brothers, and they go over to try to comfort Chandler, because that's what Krista would want them to do, one of them testified. So that's what they were gonna do. They go over there, and through a series of events, Chandler starts giving them legal advice about police cooperation. You know, you don't have to turn your phone over to police. They don't have to image it. You can just take screenshots and text it to them. Your parents are allegedly missing. You just reported them to the police as missing. And you're encouraging people not to be fully cooperative with police? He then later has pizza that night with Mary Sesto and tells Mary Sesto, she starts saying, well, can't they just ping your parents' phones? Wouldn't that work? And he said, no, they can't ping a cell phone. She, disagrees with him. Yeah, you can. He looked her in the eye, she testified, and coldly said, no, they can't. She was nervous enough of Chandler at that point that she testified that she put herself between the exit door and Chandler. At that point, she knew something had happened. She just didn't have the evidence to back it up yet, just her gut feeling. On July 8th, Chandler goes around the neighborhood and questions neighbors concerning video footage. In all fairness, his uncle did recommend that he do this, but his uncle also said it's to preserve that evidence. If you watch those videos and listen to that audio, when people and his neighbors say, yeah, I turned it over to the police yesterday, he doesn't say, okay, thank you. He starts asking him questions. Does your camera pick up the road? Does it pick up my house? Does it pick up my driveway? He's not trying to help the investigation. He's trying to figure out, are the police on to me yet? He gives media interviews to 3 different stations. And as more and more squad cars arrive, he starts calling the police, asking, hey, what's up? Also that day, on July 8th, he does some Google searches. The timing of these searches is incredibly important, folks. Those searches happened at 9:44 and 9:45 a.m. Torso is not found until 3 p.m. Krista's legs are not found until a week later. And what is he Googling? Body found, Wisconsin. Women's body found, Wisconsin. Wisconsin dismembered body found. Dead body found, Wisconsin. I think it's interesting what he wasn't Googling. Jane Doe, John Doe in hospital in Wisconsin. Car crashes in northern Wisconsin. Crimes in White Lake, Wisconsin. Drownings on Sawyer Lake, where their cabin is. Or organizations that maybe can help start a manhunt. I think it's also worth noting he had 2 vehicles available, never even went looking for his parents. There's a reason. He knew where they were. He put them there. It's also worth noting that the analyst yesterday, Courtney, before July 8th to even look at. So that either means that Chandler never Googled anything for the entire time period of those search warrants, or he cleared his history every day. On this day, he was arrested. He didn't have a chance to clear his history.
I thought they could still find it.
So he's taken down to the station where he gives about an hour-and-a-half, 2-hour interview where he gives the same lie of this mystery couple of, taking lots of alcohol to the cabin, taking a large amount of cash, because, accountants love to keep large amounts of cash around. And at some point, Detective Hendrickson is like, we know you're lying. We know your parents are no longer here. Why don't you tell us the truth? And at that point, Chandler's arrested. So that's the evidence, folks. That's the pieces of the puzzle in this case. It's not a whodunit. Cameras all around. We know that Bart and Krista went into that home and never came out, at least as whole people. That their bodies were found dismembered, discarded, and hidden throughout the southern half of Wisconsin. That's what the evidence shows. We have experts from DNA, fracture matching, trace, footwear, fire inspector. We have bones in the ash trap. Chandler Halderson killed his parents. But I think it's very important to point out that Bart and Krista Halderson are not a puzzle. It's a good metaphor. It's a helpful metaphor, perhaps, to look at evidence. But they are two people that were very much alive on June 30th of 2021. They are two people that deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. They were somebody's spouse, somebody's parents, somebody's brother, somebody's sister. They were loved by their neighbors, they had close friends, they had jobs. They were normal folks just trying to live a normal life. They don't even get to be buried next to each other. Ladies and gentlemen,
Hang on, guys. I'm having a rebuff here. I can't wait to see the response on this. Because what are you going to say? What could the defense say at this point?
Does anybody need a break? Or can we go forward?
Actually, Judge, I'm going to ask for a 10-minute break.
Okay,
Thank you.
I could use a moment too. Ladies and gentlemen, we will break, mid-morning break actually, and we'll come back for the defense closing and further instructions and perhaps rebuttal arguments. So, Randy?
All rise for the jury.
I would be like, yeah, I need a break. I'd get the hell out of there if I was the defense attorney. Yeah, this one's in the trash. It's not happening. There's no way. I mean, what do you say after that? Yeah, Patty, so they can. I thought that they could clear, even if you cleared your search history, they could still see what you Googled. I guess it was just a matter of what they could find quickly,
Thank you.
maybe.
Please be seated.
Without a bunch of
Just so you know, folks, Randy
days
determined
taking
that it'd be easier to
to
collect
find it all.
the notebooks at this point, and then once we know who the alternates are, he'll have to spend a moment sorting them out, but that way they're not in your way. Attorney Vera, would you please present the defense closing?
Thank you. Taking you back 2 weeks ago, roughly, you were told so you have an idea, as you're hearing all this evidence, how this case is going to go from both sides. From the beginning, we told you that this case was about the homicides. I listened to Attorney Brown's opening again this morning as I was getting ready, and there were some things that he noted that I think are important. First off, towards the end of his opening, he apologized for some things. Essentially, he apologized for doing his job. He said it might be repetitive, it might be boring at times, but he needs to do it because he has a constitutional obligation to present their case, and they only have one time. And that's fair. So now it's my turn to apologize. I am going to apologize for doing my job. First, let me talk about my job. A lot of people think my job is to, quote unquote, get the defendant off on their charges, to object to every single question that's asked, to ask any question I possibly can of witnesses, to be loud, obnoxious, and make a scene so that I can try to get this person off of their charges. It's not. My job is to make sure that they do their job. My job is to make sure that if they're bringing charges on someone, they're doing it because they can do it beyond a reasonable doubt. They can prove those charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And people don't like when I say those words, beyond a reasonable doubt, because it almost feels like a cop-out. And if you think that it's a cop-out, well, then your issue is not with me. Your issue is not with Chandler. Your issue is with the US Constitution that says that without them, you don't have me. And without me, you don't have them. My job is to make sure that the state, with all of its powers, look, they even have more tables than we do, that they do their job. And I'm going to do that job today.
Yeah, we've been waiting for you guys to show up.
There's a couple things that I want to address before I go any further down the evidence. The first thing I want to address is sort of the obvious. Chandler lies. He tells a lot of lies. Not only does he lie, but he goes to extreme lengths, if you will, to keep those lies going, or to perhaps cover up those lies. I guarantee you, every single person in this room has told a lie, has either covered up that lie, or has done something to keep that lie going. Maybe not now, maybe when you were a teenager. Go back to high school. I'm sure you lied to your parents all the time. You're not on trial, so your lies are not exaggerated and highlighted right now. But they are here. And the important part is that Chandler is not charged with lying to his girlfriend or to his parents. There's one charge that has to deal, one per parent, that has to deal with lying. Everything else is something that the state told you to try to feed you a theory, a motive, and to essentially taint your view on Chandler. So when we were going over jury selection, I asked you, how would you feel if you didn't testify? And a couple people said I wouldn't need to hear from him. A couple people said that they would treat him the same way they would do every witness. Bullshit. He lies, and they did a great job of making it known that he lies. If he testified, you were not going to believe anything he said. I also said that it was a game day decision, and most of the times it is a game day decision. This never was. If you heard from him, were you even going to believe him? You weren't, and that's fine, because it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, there's only one lie that really does matter, and that's the one that he said about his parents missing. I'm going to make your life a little easier, and it's going to be a little unconventional. There are certain charges that I believe the state has met their burden, and they have proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. And again, from the beginning, first-degree intentional homicide is a serious charge. We've been here for the homicides. A piece of paper that is signed, a formal piece of paper that's signed by Chandler to the Dane County Sheriff's Office about a missing persons, that clearly is not true. This is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I want you to think about that when it comes to talking about these homicides.
What? Oh,
I
y'all,
also want you to think about another thing.
what is she doing?
I made a weird noise, I apologize. But I want you to think about another thing. When Attorney Raymond did her closing, two phrases, if you will, really caught on. Several times she said, "We know." X, Y, and Z happened. We know that this happened. Pay attention to the times where she said, we don't know. We don't know. I can't tell you how she was killed. We don't know. Whatever. And it was always in the parts that had to do with the homicides. When I was in law school, I was told that the words "I don't know" should never come from that table. Because you should know. If you're charging people with crimes, you should know.
They know pretty
So now
much a
I'm gonna walk
lot.
you through the evidence that I think that they skipped over that matters for me in proving that first-degree intentional homicide was not something that they met their burden on. I first want to talk about the cabin. There is a cabin. There's no disputing that. Bart and Krista went to the cabin at least 2 or 3 times a year, I think is what someone testified to. It's possible that they could have gone to the cabin that weekend. In fact, you don't even know what their weekend plans were. Friends testified. None of them said, oh, they were going to come over to watch fireworks with us. So no one knew.
Okay, she just shot herself on the foot on that one, because there's proof that they came into the home and they never came out of it because of all the cameras. That was dumb move. Dumb move.
What their plans were that weekend. The reason they're making a big deal about it is because that is some kind of premeditation to them. That is some kind of intent. Ooh, he was going to do something that day. He knew he was going to do something that day, so he was going to say something about going to the cabin. He's talking to his girlfriend days before, on the 30th, so a day before. There's a text message exchange between Kat and Chandler, where Kat asks, we're not going to the cabin, right? And he says no. You're allowed to use your common sense. When you have conversations with significant others and you're texting, you're not going to get the full story because sometimes you do it in person. What we know from him and his girlfriend is that they chatted on Snapchat. They chatted everywhere they could. So you're not going to get the full story from text messages. But what you do know is that at some point, talks about going to this cabin as a family were happening. So this notion that the idea of going to the cabin was last minute because he needed to cover up these homicides that he was going to do is not true. Now, again with the lies. Certain lies mattered. Certain lies did not. What I want to clear up, and Attorney Raymond did a great job when she mentioned that we've seen this case multiple times. We've dealt with this case. We've talked to each other about this case. So sometimes we get things wrong. I'm going to clear up something that they got wrong. The evidence does not show that Bart and Krista knew about this SpaceX job. You heard from Kat's mother, Dulce, that she knew about it. You heard about Cress knew about it. Kat talked about it. Maybe another friend or roommate talked about it, but you never heard anyone testify that Bart and Krista knew about the SpaceX job. You heard from Bart's brother, Brett. I do not believe he mentioned it at all. So that's not a lie on this house of cards that was crashing down that Bart and Krista knew about. You also didn't hear that they knew about the scuba team, dive team, whatever you want to call it, lie with the City of Madison Police Department. You heard it from his girlfriends, ex's girlfriends and Kat. You heard it from his friends, but you didn't hear it from people that knew Bart and Krista and said that they mentioned it. And even then, all of these lies, what does it matter? So I want to talk about the 2 lies that the state really honed in on. And boy, did they do a great job talking about these lies and making it seem like it really was a big deal. Let's talk about MATC. First of all, yesterday, I think we heard from an official person from MATC that said no record that he attended school during this time. Detective Shunk showed us transcripts. You saw all his grades. He did attend at some point. That was really all you needed. You did not need to have the email conversations. You did not need the text conversations. You didn't need any of that, but they provided it to you, even though it's not an element or a charge that they have to prove.
But you didn't object to it.
During their opening and throughout the case, they made a big deal about this email. It was an email between Bart and Krista. First of all, the email happened October 10th, 2020. The jig was up a long time ago. It didn't all of a sudden crash and burn on the 1st of July, 2021. And Bart knew. He was onto it. He says he sounds just like Chaz on the phone. Use your common sense. These email exchanges are from people with a .gmail.com address. Official school people using a .gmail.com address. Both Bart and Krista are college educated. You want to tell me that they honestly thought that this was legit? Or maybe they knew that their child was lying and they were just going to carry on the lie. Same with AmFam. And I use AmFam colloquially, but American Family Insurance. Again, there was a person that testified yesterday that Chandler never worked there, but you still had emails, you still had text messages, you still had this and that confirming that he lied, even though one person could have done that. And again, it's not an element that they needed to prove. It's not a charge that they needed to prove. They just wanted you to know that he's a liar. And what does it matter? Here's what you need to ask yourself. What does it matter? Because according to them, that's motive. That's the reason why he did what he did. This house of cards built of lies was crashing down and he had nothing. He couldn't do anything, but he had to murder these people. Why? Why? You don't know why. You were never told that they were going to kick him out of the house. You were never told that they were going to disown him. You were never told anything about why it matters.
They didn't have to prove that.
If this is going to be motive, if this is the reason you're intentionally killing someone, it better matter. There better be consequences. Kids lie to their parents all the time. And you just don't know how this was going to affect Chandler. He's complaining to his girlfriend the morning of about everything being fucked up and crashing down. You do that. That's what significant others are for.
I can't believe she's cussing like that.
You honestly think that he's complaining about things crashing down and his mind is going straight to, well, now I'm just going to murder them. There was another motive that was mentioned very briefly, but it was mentioned, so I'll talk about it. When Mitchell testified, the very last question was about a life insurance policy. And I believe he said that the payout may have been about $1 million. And he acted confused. He didn't really know about it. It could very well be that the only reason he knows that number, that value, is because of things that are happening now. I don't doubt that kids know about parents having life insurance policies. I don't doubt that. But ask yourself this, does everyone know how much the policy is worth? Probably not. Do you think you're going to get $1 million from your parents? Probably not. And there was no evidence that was provided to show that Chandler knew that there was a policy in place and he knew the value, knew enough of that value to do something very drastic to get that money. There was no evidence that he needed money. Yes, he didn't have a job, but nothing came out that he needed money. And I'm spending time talking about a motive because, as the judge said, they don't need to prove a motive. Motive does not mean intent, and I need you to understand that. Motive does not mean intent. The other important part that I want to focus on is this timeline. If you go back to the opening, the state said that from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. on the 1st, the killings occurred. Again, it's not evidence, but it is a roadmap, and it is important because that's how they're going to tailor their case throughout. Well, first of all, Krista didn't get home until after 5 o'clock, roughly around 5:12. They made a big deal about this MATC meeting. MATC with Chaz, MATC. You don't know if that was in person. You don't know what it's about other than MATC. You don't know if it was just a conversation that they were going to have. You don't know if it's a follow-up. You don't know anything about it other than some kind of MATC chat was going to happen between Bart and Chandler. And that was going to happen at 3 o'clock. I don't know about you, but my meetings never run on time. The other important part with this timeline is what we heard yesterday from Bart's employer. We asked him about that spreadsheet that has these logins. And remember, the logins were in Eastern time. So what we said, what we were able to get out is that roughly from about 4:13, there was a login. What do we know about that login? We know that it's required, a password is required. We also know that, like a lot of dads, people keep their passwords in a place where they can remember them. We also know that the logins, that there was a certain amount of logins that you were able to do before you were booted out. We also know that that person tried these passwords, couldn't get in. So there's some leaps that you have to make in order for this theory or this timeline to make sense. The first leap you have to make is that Chandler knew that password. There's no evidence that he knew that. The second theory that you have to make is that while he's allegedly murdering his parents, he had the wherewithal to go to this computer and put on YouTube or something to keep it going when there's no evidence that that even happened. There was a lot of evidence about cell phone data that were extracted, computer data, all of that, but nothing about Bart's laptop showing that there was YouTube or anything to keep that computer active, because it had to be active. It would shut down or it would log off after 20 minutes of inactivity. The other piece of evidence with this timeline is that you had that neighbor that during their closing, the state said that the neighbor smelled something around 8 to 9 p.m. No, they testified that it was around 7 o'clock that they started smelling something. What we do know is that roughly around 8, around 8:30-ish, maybe a little earlier, look at your notes, Chandler went to Quick Trip to buy some ice. So again, another leap that you're supposed to make is that while he's allegedly murdering his parents, he decides, I'm going to start this fire. I'm going to put some things in that fire, but wait, I have to go to Quick Trip. Use your common sense. That makes sense to absolutely no one. They don't get the benefit of the doubt that I get. So they can't say, well, we might have been wrong about the timeline. They don't get that. What you have is a medical examiner, 2 medical examiners that could not say the time of death. So really, truly, do you know what time these alleged homicides happened? You don't. You know that that happened that day based on other circumstantial evidence that you can put together, but you don't know the exact time. Let's talk about what else you do not know. You do not know what gun was used. They want to make a big deal about this gun. Let's talk about it. You heard from a medical examiner that there was at least 2 to 3 shots of a gun, period. That medical examiner was not able to tell you what kind of gun, wasn't even able to tell you if it was a high-powered rifle, just a gun. She also wasn't able to tell you which wound occurred first. So this contact wound, that could have been the last one. That could have been the first one. You don't know. This gun was not even located until October. These homicides occurred in July. Chandler apparently hid everything. He hid it so well that they didn't find it until October when the owner of that farm was cleaning out. If anything, Dane County deputies did a thorough investigation. They spent at least 3 hours in that barn. You want to tell me they couldn't find a gun, but they were able to find a tarp? What you know from the gun is that there's a bullet casing and a bullet fragment in this basement that match to this gun. You do not know when that casing was there. You don't even know if that bullet fragment and that casing happened at the same time. You don't know that this is the gun that was used on Bart. You don't know that. So whenever you don't know about something, you have to ask yourself, have they met their burden? Is this proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Because you do have examples of what proof beyond a reasonable doubt is. Those maps that we saw yesterday, tracking Chandler's every single move, matching up with where the bodies were found and at the time that they were found, that's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. A bloody tarp and some tools, that's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But that doesn't mean that a homicide occurred. It means that something awful happened. And no one's disputing that. No one is saying that nothing happened to Bart and Krista. Something awful happened to these two people. And the very least you can say is that Chandler reacted. But you do not know what happened. And I know some of you have already made up your mind. I see it, and that's fine. Maybe you do think he murdered his parents. The question I have for you is, did the state meet their burden when it comes to first-degree intentional homicide? There are a lot of different homicides. First, second, reckless. They chose first-degree intentional homicide because they believed that they could prove that. I'm asking you that question. What have you been given that proves intent?
She basically just
Some
said,
searches after the
she basically just said, you admitted, you're going to have to let us off on a technicality.
fact. During closing, they said that the last time that there was any kind of search happened on the 8th. And they believed that he was just deleting his searches every day and he wasn't able to delete his searches on the 8th because he was arrested. Their search is on the 7th. And hey, guess what? There are times when I do not Google something. There are times when you all don't Google something. So he was smart enough to delete his Google history, but he's not smart enough to delete anything else. He's smart enough to do a very good job about cleaning these homicides. But man, was he just really bad when it came to everything else. You cannot have it both ways. You can't have someone that is so cold and calculated to clean everything up and then say to themselves, I'm going to leave one casing. You just can't have that with everything else that happened after these homicides. It's kind of laughable when you think about it.
Well, we were laughing, but it wasn't at them.
And you just don't have that with these homicides. Why? Why don't you have that? There was no evidence, there was no testimony at any point saying that Chandler had planned this out, and they would have brought it to you if they had it. There's no evidence at all that Chandler is a violent person. And I'm not saying that you need to be a violent person to commit homicides. I don't, you know that.
She said there's no evidence.
But again, intent is something that means something. And there's just no evidence that's providing you with that level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt that you need for this first-degree intentional homicide. Do you know how Bart was killed?
Yeah, they told us it was bullet
Exactly how he was killed.
close to his
Do
skin.
you know how Krista was killed?
That's the only thing we don't know.
Do you know if it was an awful accident? Do you know if it was intentional? Do you know if there was someone else involved?
We're pretty much sure it was
You
intentional.
don't. And that's a problem.
Bless her heart. I agree, JPC.
Now, for better or for worse, this case has gotten a lot of media attention. And unfortunately, I have to bring it up. You were asked every day whether or not you saw something on the news, whether you heard something on the news. And you were asked that for a reason. You guys have a really bad job coming up. It's difficult. I do not want your job. You have to go back and look at everything and make sure that everything that you're discussing in that room actually came from evidence that you heard from that stand and not from the Google searches that you may or may not have done. I'm hoping you didn't, but I'm going to be realistic.
Really? Really?
Or the comment section on YouTube.
Now she's going after the jury.
And you're going to have to hold that person accountable, and you're going to have to hold that person accountable because that's your duty.
Yeah, I think they're going to sleep well.
Very serious duty that's going to be hard for each and every one of you to do.
They're going to sleep
You're
fine,
going to
Tim.
have to take your emotions out of the equation. There was another promise that was said during the state's opening. They promised you that they were not going to try to tug at your heartstrings and show you pictures that they didn't need to show you. When Mitchell testified, do you think he needed a giant blow-up picture of his parents next to him to be reminded what his parents looked like? When Brett testified, do you think it was important for their case to ask him the last conversation he had with his brother? Oh, and it happened to be on his birthday?
Irrelevant.
The birthday being July 1st? No, they didn't do that because they needed it for the case. They did it because they want you to think of your emotions. They want you to feel things, because when you feel things, it's going to be harder for you to separate feelings from facts. And you're going to have to do that because you may feel bad. No one here feels great about what happened. And after you make your decision, no one's going to walk out of this courtroom feeling at ease, at peace, happy. But you're going to have to do that. And people are not going to like it, regardless of what the decision is. And you're going to have to hold people accountable for it. Now, I don't get to come back up. When I'm done, the state's going to come up and they're going to do their rebuttal. And they're going to say everything that I said is flawed some way, somehow, or that you shouldn't pay attention to it. And that's fine. That's their job. They have the burden. They have the last say. But when they're talking during their rebuttal, I want you to think of this. What if I told you that at any minute, someone's going to walk into that door, someone from the Dane County Deputy's Department is going to walk in and say, I found it. I found the video we were looking for. I know exactly what happened in that house on the 1st. It doesn't exist. But what if it did? Are you going to be paying attention to, I'm going to assume it's Mr. Brown, but are you going to be paying attention to what Mr. Brown has to say during his rebuttal? Or are you going to be looking at that door hoping that someone walks in? And if you're going to look at that door hoping that someone comes in, you have reasons to doubt.
Was that supposed to be an
There
effective
are
pause?
Plenty of reasons to doubt that a first-degree intentional homicide occurred. There are plenty of reasons to doubt. You may not like that. It may feel like a cop-out. It may feel like I'm just doing something for the sake of coming up here and talking to you. I'm not. I'm doing my job. I'm making sure that they do their job. And I'm asking you to do your very difficult job of evaluating everything. And from day one, the issue has been the homicides. I want you to spend time on the homicides. Ask yourself the questions that you need to ask. I guarantee you that the 12 of you that are going to go back and deliberate are all going to have 12 different theories on what happened, and that's a problem.
Coming up on the next one where they do the rebuttal.
I'm asking you to find him not guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
You guys. This is a no-brainer. That jury's going to sleep fine at night. So now they get to come up and do their rebuttal. This is going to be great.
Thank you, Attorney Vera.
Yeah, she's
As
trying
counsel
to.
indicated, the state carrying the burden of proof has the opportunity for a rebuttal. In other words, the last word. And I believe Attorney Brown will provide that to you at this time.
Am I buffering? I think I'm buffering.
Thank you. So
Get me.
a lot of talk in the defense closing and opening about things they learned in law school or going to law school. And I think in the opening, I heard at one point, being on a jury is different than being a person. I don't know if any of that's true, but I'm done with law school and I do this for a living. I operate in a world of common sense and not fanciful thoughts of just this guy finding his dead parents and deciding, no big deal, let's just cut them apart and hide them around the state. But who knows how they died? I live in that world. That's the world you should live into, because being a juror is no different than being a person, unlike maybe what you were told earlier. You're told by the judge, although they figured out a way to say it in about 2 paragraphs, you use your common sense and experience in the roles of everyday life, or something along those lines. A bunch of lawyers got together and thought about it for 2 weeks and figured out a way to say, use your common sense. Ms. Vera just stood up here and said, what if this was an awful accident? Bart Halderson was shot in the back twice. You do not fall down and shoot yourself in the back twice. Bart Halderson and Krista Halderson had their heads chopped off, had their arms and legs removed. That was an awful accident. Think of for a second. You heard about the bones. You saw those marks on the bones, those attempts. Some of them 3, some of them 10, some of them 5. False starts is what the anthropologists call them. That is someone on their hands and knees Chandler, apparently, which was just the same. I guess we're admitting to that now. They lied and chopped him up and hit him around the state. On his hands and knees, some of them from the front to back, meaning probably could see the face of his mom and his dad as that saw moved back and forth, back and forth.
Yep.
And you just saw the bones, but what's before the bones? The skin, the blood, the muscle, the fat, the smell that they had to produce, the blood of his own parents. An awful accident. We heard, I go days without Googling things. I don't, maybe you do. But I bet you don't Google dismembered body found in Wisconsin when you're crying on the local news about your missing parents. I bet you don't Google woman's dismembered body found. I bet you don't do legal research about some other guy who chopped up his family members and threw them in a river. Bet you don't do that. This process is common sense. Ms. Vera talked a lot about the lies. Chandler is a liar, and it seems like we all agree on that now. Lots of people lie. I can agree with Ms. Vera on that.
Night,
The
Mark.
question in this case isn't who would do this? And maybe that's something that's gone through your mind here. Who would do this? Who would go through all this? Who would make up all these lies? Who would take it this far? All these fake people, the burner phone, the nonsense, the calls to his dad, the emails back and forth, the friends and family, the move to Florida. Who would do this? And you're going to leave this room. 6 of you are going to go home. 12 of you are going to go into a room and talk to each other. And you're never going to have an answer to that question. Because who would do this in the common sense meaning of it? Nobody does something like this. But that's not the role of a jury. You're answering a different question, which is who did this, not who would do this. Because for the life of you, I bet before you got that notice in the mail a couple months ago saying you had to come here, you would say nobody. You would have said nobody. Nobody would shoot their dad in the back twice, kill their mom, lay him on the ground in front of their family fireplace, take scissors and pruning shears, take a hacksaw, take a keyhole saw, and saw off their heads, arms, legs, burn them in the fireplace. Over 100 fragments of human bone found in that fireplace. You would say no one would do this. But you got your jury summons, and you ended up here, and you found out that someone did do it. Chandler Halderson did it. So those lies are important. Because you at some level have to grasp how this man got to that point. As I said in the opening statement, the murders were just a small piece of the puzzle. None of the things that happened before, none of the things that happened after make any sense. You got to have the murders to understand why he did that bizarre story for 7 days of his parents going missing with the unknown couple. And you can understand the murders if you understand what happened before with his bizarre actions of building up this life that wasn't real. Why were those lies important? They were important because that's all he had. We're here because of the deaths of Bart and Krista Halderson, and they are dead. There's no doubt about that. You have most decidedly concluded that at this point. You have seen their bodies. But on some level, whoever Chandler Halderson was died years ago as well. And what was left was this shell of a person who made this nonsense up, who built himself up to be a tech employee, rescue scuba diving guy, who was going to college. It was all he had.
Who was clumsy
It was
as
all
hell.
he had.
Don't forget how clumsy he is.
And that started to unravel. Maybe his parents suspected it. But you listened to Bart Halderson on that call just about a day before he was killed. That sound like someone to you who knew his son had been lying to him? Those text messages. I spoke to Omar Joe. I'm ready whenever you are. He didn't know what was going on until that moment. So when Bart Halderson finds out that this is a lie to Chandler, whoever Chandler Halderson is, the whole world crumbles. Because if you weren't going to school, they sure weren't going to hire you at American Family Insurance. That couldn't have been real. There's no way you got a job at SpaceX. What else are you lying about? Where are you going all the time when you say you're training for this scuba diving team? Everything about him falls apart. He doesn't have any money. Remember when he texted his girlfriend he was going to the police? Hey, can I have $5 for a sandwich? He can't just leave. He can't move out. He can't get in a car and head west. He probably couldn't make it out of the state with the amount of money he had because he never had a job.
That's horrible.
He had two options. Own up to his lies, stand up and finally tell the truth for once, or like a coward, shoot your father in the back. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. Ms. Veras says, wow, we just got a showcase. Yeah, we got a bullet fragment. Just happens to have Bart Halderson's DNA on it. When you looked at it, just happens to appear to have blood all over it. And then text my mom. Hey, pick up soda for me. Dad's phone's dead. She gets home. Whose blood spatters on the safe right there by the bullet fragment? Those little red dots, human blood. It's Krista Halderson. We don't know what happened. We know exactly what happened. Murders are not captured on video. That's not how this happens. That's how this works. Sure, in the grand scheme of things, there are some people who are stupid enough to walk up to a gas station, stand in front of the security camera and shoot somebody. But that's not real life. That's not common sense. Chandler Halderson did this in the basement of his house. The blood is everywhere. The bullet's there. You heard from Mr. Wellerberry, who testified, he only found one, and the one he found was kind of rolled behind under that bench. He tried to clean up. Peroxide everywhere. He's having people bring him peroxide. Blood all over that fireplace stoop. Bone fragments in the ash trap. You know exactly what happened. You don't need a video. The lies are important because it's all Chandler Halderson had. And when they were exposed, he started coming up with this plan. And yeah, after the Omar Job text comes in on the 29th, he's having a conversation with his girlfriend. You heard, it's fair, actually read it, and that's fair. The day before, hey, are we going to the cabin? What's going on? They're talking about the cabin. He's starting to dabble with the idea of what he's doing. But then I think it was at 1:04 p.m., just about an hour and a half, 2 hours before he did it, he says they're going to the cabin this weekend. He made his final decision. Because at that moment, Chandler Halderson knew there was no way out. He couldn't get in the car and drive away. He couldn't make up another lie. He couldn't make up another email. He couldn't buy another burner phone. It was done. Everyone was going to see him for what he was. Just some liar. Some guy without a job, not going to school, who'd been lying to everyone for years. And he couldn't handle that.
Piece of crap.
So he committed the ultimate act of betrayal against your parents. Perhaps against any human being, but especially your parents, the person who held you when you were a baby and cleaned up your cuts on your knee when you were learning to ride a bike, comforted you when you were crying. The ultimate act of betrayal. He shot his parents. And then he cut them up and he hid them. But the lies didn't even stop there. It was a new lie. No, that's the cabin. Now he's on the news. Now he's giving interviews. Given 2-3 more days, don't think for a second there wouldn't have been 2-3 more fake emails. Text messages from my mom. A whole new world. A whole new reality for Chandler that he got to live in. His checklist is right there. Finally, he was going to get a job. Obviously, mom and dad couldn't support him anymore. Maybe he was going to get some life insurance. Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't. But he certainly got to continue on his fake life. He got to keep his girlfriend. People continued to respect him. His friends probably continued to think that he was successful.
Only had one.
Important. The lies were rinsed and repeated, rinsed and repeated. And I promise I'm about done, and I'm the last person who talks. The judge is going to talk a little bit more. What he's going to say next is hard to hear in that he has to read off the verdict forms you're going to take back to the jury room with you. Verdict forms are the physical documents for each charge. There's a bunch of charges here. For each one, there's one that says guilty and not guilty, guilty and not guilty, guilty and not guilty. And he actually read them all. And it doesn't make a lot of sense, but he has to do it. But what Ms. Vera is asking you to do is to lie. It is the last lie of Chandler Halderson. His lawyers stood up here and told you to lie for him. Not to do what you swore to do, which is to render a just and true verdict based on the evidence, to reconcile the evidence, if you can find any reasonable hypothesis consistent with the defendant's innocence, a reasonable hypothesis. That reasonable hypothesis that was just offered to you is that it was an accident. That's how they died. And then Chandler made what his attorney believes to be the reasonable decision to chop apart those bodies and hide them around the state. What you're being asked to do is to lie one last time. It is the experience that everyone in Chandler Halderson's life has had to deal with, and now it's yours. His girlfriend dealt with it. Sure, Bart and Krista dealt with it, finding out maybe on the last day of their lives. Mitchell is dealing with it. Brett is dealing with it. Their family friends, the Hilgendorfs, their kids, Haley and Hannah, they've had to deal with it. Mary Sesto had to deal with it. Kevin Linsmeyer, the neighbor, had to deal with it. Then to the police. Deputy Seeley, Deputy Nelson, Deputy Schultz, Deputy Sims, Deputy Hendrickson, Deputy Collins-LaFleur. Everyone who has interacted with this man for years has had no other experience other than being lied to. And now it's you that's going to be lied to by his attorneys. Asking
Okay,
you.
I'm gonna object now.
Oh! Oh my goodness. We got a little bit of drama going on.
Thanks for your patience, folks. I want to clarify that, of course, within the instructions, as far as closing argument evidence, closing argument being opinions expressed by counsel for both the state and the defense to you about their view of the evidence and so forth. My understanding is the state was not meaning to suggest that counsel for the defense had lied or in any way was urging you to do anything other than uphold your oath and to follow the law as instructed in your deliberations.
Okay, Judge.
Continue.
Thank you. Those verdict forms you're going to fill out, every single one of them represents something that happened. And what we're asking you to do is to dig through that evidence, dig through your notes, dig through your memory of what happened. What happened here wasn't an accident. What happened here wasn't a mistake. What happened here wasn't innocent lies, coincidences. Mr. Halderson's statement to the police that my mom has nosebleeds and my dad, he just scratches his psoriasis. It doesn't explain his blood on a bullet fragment. It doesn't explain all of their blood on the fireplace. It doesn't explain the Halderson's teeth in the ash trap. It doesn't explain their skull in the ash trap and placed on top of the fireplace. What I'm asking you to do is to look for the truth and not to negotiate. Not take the idea that, well, there's one piece of paper there where he signed a document and says he lied to the cops, and maybe that's good enough. These people were killed. This is a first-degree intentional homicide. This is a first-degree intentional homicide. You cannot shoot someone in the back. You cannot chop them up. You cannot scatter their remains and come to any other conclusion. And there is only one person who did those things here, and that is Chandler Halderson. And we're asking you to find him guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel.
Okay, so now we're going to listen to the verdict. It took them 2 hours to come up with their verdict. That's it. Jury deliberated for 2 hours only. Are we surprised? Come on now. No. Now, he did try to, his appeal was based upon inadequate counsel, I do believe. It was denied. Didn't go anywhere, but. Hey, John Bubba, welcome in. I know Angst Ball. They had to do their job, yeah, but all the defense attorney could do was go after the prosecution because they didn't have anything. Oh, do y'all think he's going to be found guilty? Shocker. Oh, spoiler alert. For those of you that have been watching and are not aware, this is an old trial. We know the outcome. Louis says, shocker. Yeah, how did he even, I don't know. I don't know if they offered him a plea. Let me Google it. Because I do Google every day, by the way. Was Chandler Halderson offered a plea deal? Doesn't say. Oh, it doesn't say. It says he pled guilty. Maybe they didn't have to give him a deal. Well, they might could have offered him a deal to try to find out if they could find the rest of the remains. That would be on behalf of the brother, you know? All right. Why don't we have any sound here, people? There we go.
We're back on the record, and the appearances are as they were previously. Is there anything from the state before we have the jury join us?
No.
Anything from the defense?
No.
Randy, if you would.
I think we'll watch the sentencing after this, guys. Let's go ahead and get it done with. What do you think? Y'all in? It's about an hour and 20 minutes long. I just checked. You know what? That's a great point, Helen. Why would he want to be? I mean, I think he was going for the sympathy card, you know? He always went for the sympathy card in everything he did. That had to have been what it was. Surely they'll see what a great guy I am, that I couldn't have done this.
Please be seated. Juror number 6, by all indications, you would be the foreperson. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Sir, did the jury reach verdicts on all counts in this matter?
We did.
Could you please give Randy the folder?
Judge is like, okay, yeah.
The verdict form on count 1, as signed by the presiding juror and dated today, reads, "We, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as to Bart A. Halderson, as charged in count 1 of the amended information. As to the verdict form for count 2, as signed and dated, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of providing false information about a missing person as to Bart A. Halderson, as charged in count 2 of the amended information. Verdict form for count 3, as signed and dated, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of mutilating a corpse as to Bart A. Halderson, as charged in count 3 of the amended information. Verdict form for count 4, as signed and dated, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of hiding a corpse as to Bart A. Halderson, as charged in count 4 of the amended information. The verdict form for count 5, as signed and dated, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as to Krista R. Halderson, as charged in count 5 of the amended information. The verdict form for count 6, as signed and dated by the foreperson, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of providing false information about a missing person as to Krista R. Halderson, as charged in count 6 of the amended information. Form as to count 7, as signed and dated, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of mutilating a corpse as to Krista R. Halderson, as charged in count 7 of the amended information. And finally, the verdict form for count 8, as signed and dated, reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of hiding a corpse as to Krista R. Halderson, as charged in count 8 of the amended information. I will note for the record that the jury also returned the 8 verdict forms that read not guilty and that those do not bear any signature or date, as well as returning the jury instructions. Let me inquire of you, and I'll use initials. Ms. B, are the verdicts which I read the verdicts with which you agreed? Yes. Mr. Daringer, are those the verdicts with which you agreed? Yes. Mr. H, are those the verdicts with which you agreed? Yes, they are. Mr. M, are those the verdicts with which you agreed? I do not need to ask the foreperson as his signature appeared on the verdicts. Ms. C, are those the, Mr. C, are those the verdicts with which you agreed? Ms. W, are those the verdicts with which you agreed? Mr. M, are those the verdicts with which you agreed? Mr. H, are those the verdicts with which you agreed? Mr. A, are those the verdicts with which you agreed? Mr. J, are those the verdicts with which you agreed? And finally, Mr. B, are those the verdicts with which you agreed? Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, you have finished your service here as the jury in this case. I have to tell you that words are difficult to come with to express the gratitude that I feel and that I believe those people within the criminal justice system which we serve feel regarding
another thing too, guys, is that his defense didn't even, they had no witnesses. They didn't call up any witnesses.
That we were here in court. Unusually in this case, we spent a number of days away from here. And yet you still followed your oath, the directions I gave you, and you were committed wholly and wholeheartedly to this process, and I thank you. I'll be happy to meet with you after I'm finished here in the courtroom if you wish to stay, and please go with our thanks and gratitude. Randy?
All right,
I agree, Helen. You are so right. You are so right. I have something else I want you guys to watch. I got some footage here I want to talk about now before we look at the sentencing portion. Can you imagine his lawyers were like, oh, God, he's so annoying. He's so annoying. Kill me now. Okay. Let's listen to these. This talks a little bit about how he got 2 charges dropped.
Will he appear or not? That is the question as we look ahead to Chandler Halderson's sentencing later this week. Our digital content manager, James Langer, has been following the case since day one and spoke to an attorney about why Halderson is asking not to attend his own sentencing, James.
Yeah, there are a couple of schools of thought here. The defense is arguing Halderson should be able to waive his right to appear at his sentencing, while the DA's office says the state law requires that he appear. Local defense attorneys not involved in the case say this is the kind of request that's rare, but it's not totally unheard of. They say it's possible Halderson's defense team may just be trying to avoid a scene on Thursday, or Halderson might simply feel he doesn't need to be there, considering he's facing a mandatory life sentence.
We, the jury, find
It could be that, he has the right to appeal. He didn't testify at the trial, so he hasn't made public statements beyond, what was played in trial as part of an interview. It could be that he's maintaining his innocence and he doesn't have anything to add and doesn't want to be there.
Now, prosecutor William Brown wrote Judge Hyland a letter over the weekend asking him to reject the motion not to appear, arguing, quote, the defendant has no right to simply skip court hearings that might be uncomfortable or to avoid finally being held responsible for his behavior.
Exactly.
Halderson's sentencing hearing is scheduled for 1:30 on Thursday afternoon. We'll be streaming the whole thing over at channel3000.com and on Channel 3000 Plus streaming apps.
The Dane County man convicted of killing and dismembering his parents will have to face his family and the public at his sentencing hearing tomorrow.
Well, the judge in the case made that ruling this morning. Our digital content manager, James Langer, has the details on what we need to know ahead of this sentencing, James.
Yeah, Chandler Halderson's attorneys filed the motion last week saying he wished to waive his right to appear at his sentencing tomorrow. But Judge John Hyland said today that Wisconsin law doesn't allow him to do that. The legal precedent for this comes from a state Supreme Court case in 1997. In that case, the court ruled that defendants in felony cases could not intentionally skip their sentencing hearings. Because of that, Judge Hyland rejected Halderson's request today, saying in part, quote, requiring his attendance at trial may violate Halderson's expressed wishes, but it does not violate his constitutional rights. Judge Hyland also expressed concerns about what allowing Halderson to skip the hearing would mean for a possible appeal. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for 1:30 tomorrow afternoon. We'll be streaming the entire hearing over at channel3000.com and on our YouTube and Facebook pages.
So sentencing always really interesting and a chance for family to speak. Who are we expecting to hear from tomorrow?
Yeah, there's a chance that we could hear from some of his family members as well. As for Chandler himself, the idea that he didn't want to show up for this hearing tomorrow seems to indicate from the experts that I talked to that it's not likely that he will speak before his sentence is handed down.
All right, James, we really appreciate your coverage on this. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
If he does, it's going to be all
A Dane
live.
County judge vacated 2 convictions against Chandler Halderson during a hearing today. A jury found Halderson guilty of 8 counts in January of last year for killing his parents, Bart and Krista Halderson, in July of 2021. Among those charges were 2 counts each of mutilating and hiding a corpse. At today's hearing, Judge John Hyland vacated those 2 convictions, saying the jury should not have had the option of convicting Halderson on both charges.
Obviously, the main counts are still in place, and Chandler wants to appeal that, and we'll be working on that appeal in the future. But we're very happy today that counts 4 and counts 8 were dismissed.
Judge Hyland says he wanted to address the issue in Halderson's case now, since it was not raised during the initial trial. Halderson was sentenced in March of last year to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
A year after being convicted of killing his parents, Chandler Halderson was once again in court. Today, 2 of those convictions were vacated. Arman Rahman is here to explain why and how this would affect his sentence. Arman?
Eric, the long and short of it is it doesn't change anything. He's still serving a life sentence for the 2021 murders of his parents. A Dane County judge says 2 of the 8 charges he was convicted for shouldn't have been included. But this actually keeps him from being forced to get a new trial or other possible relief. Chandler Halderson back in court, but for a reason experts say
This is a little unusual.
According to Dane County Judge John Hyland, when Halderson was found guilty for the murder and dismemberment of his parents, Bart and Krista,
guilty of hiding a corpse
He shouldn't have been convicted for 2 counts of hiding a corpse because it was a lesser charge for the 2 counts of mutilating a corpse.
There was this sort of conflict about the act of mutilating the corpse might have been the act of concealing the corpse.
Halderson is currently serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole after being convicted of first-degree intentional homicide.
The state didn't oppose. They said, look, there's a life sentence here either way. He's not getting out either way. The homicide convictions stand either way. Why don't we just take this issue away from the Court of Appeals and resolve it now?
According to Nicholson, a defense attorney not affiliated with the case, it's understandable that the lesser included charges were not caught sooner.
It wasn't the charge that was going to carry the weight of the prison time. So I think that despite all conscientious efforts by counsel, it was something that just wasn't a major factor in prep.
Nicholson says it doesn't hurt Halderson's chances for appeal, but those would be a long shot.
Can Mr. Halderson continue to attempt to seek relief? Sure. That's him writing letters in the wind. So everyone can expect whatever noise is made from this defendant in post-conviction, it's going to be exactly that noise.
Good gracious. All right, so I wanted you guys to hear some of that about what the attorneys had to say about them dropping those charges. But let's watch the sentencing real quick. I think we'll watch this one.
For the judge to decide today after.
Okay.
All rise for the court.
Helen, you're cracking me up with the neck brace comment. That's hilarious. So true, too.
Give me just a moment to make sure everything is set up here and to sign in.
Oh, he's got a yellow bow tie on today. He's so cute. Such a nice man. I bet he has grandchildren. I bet he has lots of grandchildren. Yeah, John Bubba on the 18th next week. $9 a.m. on the 18th.
Did we know if anyone else was expected to participate via Zoom?
I think we have him on right here.
All right.
Wonder who's going to speak. It's a little loud. Let me try to fix the volume a little bit. It's a little loud. It's his microphone, I think. I'm sure his brother will speak.
That looks good. Thank you, April. Let me call State of Wisconsin versus Chandler M. Halderson, case number 21CM 1568. Is that the correct case number?
CF.
CF 1568. Could I have the appearances, please?
William Brown and Andrew Raymond appear for the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you.
Mr. Halderson appears in custody in court with his attorneys Crystal Vera and Catherine Doral. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Let's first touch base to ensure that everyone has had access to the same materials as we're here for sentencing. A pre-sentence investigation was ordered, and Agent Alyssa Burke filed with the court the report of that investigation on March 7th. Attorney Brown, did the state receive and have the opportunity to review a copy?
We have.
And are there any substantial corrections that the state needs to note for the record?
No.
Attorney Vera, did you, Attorney Doral, and your client have an opportunity to receive and review the report?
We did.
Now, I did receive from Attorney Doral's signature a letter March 14th raising a couple of issues. Were there anything in addition to those that you wanted to raise?
No, Your Honor.
I'm going to order that that letter be attached to the pre-sentence so that it accompanies it and notes those corrections and issues. In this age of electronics, there's no whiting out or writing on the original anymore, but I want to ensure that those are noted for purposes of future reference to this report. And I will note as well that the court received, as I noted, and reviewed the report multiple times. Agent Burke, you have my gratitude for your work in this matter. I always appreciate the information I glean from your reports and those of your fellow agents, but I understand the work that goes into this, and I understand the number of steps you take and how you reach out. And thank you very much for everything with regard to this matter and those reports. I also wanted to note the following victim impact statements, which the court received, to ensure that the parties received those as well. Beyond statements reflected within the pre-sentence, I received a victim impact statement from BH, which is Mr. Halderson's brother, from CAN, Mr. Mitchell Halderson's fiance, JAH, who, as I recall, testified at trial and is essentially a sister in spirit to Krista Halderson. And then a fourth letter from an individual ET who was an individual impacted here based upon past connections with Krista Halderson. I also did receive, courtesy of JAH, one of the memorial cards regarding the, what I assume were funeral services regarding Bart and Krista Halderson. Attorney Brown, has the state received and had an opportunity to review all of those materials?
Yes.
Do you know of anything that I've overlooked that was submitted?
No.
And Attorney Vera, have you, Attorney Doral, and your client been provided the opportunity to review all those materials?
For some reason, the ET one doesn't sound familiar.
I did direct that it be distributed to everyone.
Was that from today?
That would have been a few days ago. It had come in directly to the court.
She
I can
tore it
provide
up.
a copy to you.
She tore it up. Yeah, Lenny, I've got it set up already on my channel.
If we could just have a moment to review it, thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh, please take your time. Really? She accepts for value in return for value. That document. Chandler's like, oh, what's going on? So I want to know if they're going to speak in the court or if they were just letters that were sent rather than speaking. I don't know. I think if it was me, honestly, if it was me and I was Chandler's brother, I wouldn't want the whole world to see what I was going to say. I would say it in private to him. And I would tell the judge in private too, probably. That makes sense.
And Judge, perhaps there's partially it's amended media order in the trial. I don't imagine there'll be a problem, but I think there may be some new folks here from the media regarding the filming of people in the gallery here.
I'll print for each party a copy. I actually did distribute a media order about a half hour ago regarding those types of issues. I'll print a copy for you here in the courtroom.
We appreciate it.
So y'all think it's a copy of one of the letters written by
Oh, okay, thank you.
on behalf of the victims? I didn't hear him say that. I think y'all are hearing things. Yeah. You all have a problem. This is not a Brooksaholics meeting.
And go ahead and take a look at that.
Share, you weirdo.
Attorney Vera.
Could we get one more copy, please? We gave ours to the state.
As we talked, it does appear that this is one the state didn't have either. It was sent directly to the court.
I'll
So
print a copy.
Thank you.
With all due respect, Your Honor. Y'all been watching Brooks on other channels, haven't you? Don't lie to me. You all have a problem. You're sick. You're sick people. I didn't say it was a Brooksaholics meeting. Lenny, it'll be on the 18th. The defendant. Well, that's not good. I was hoping that we would hear some of the statements, but maybe we won't. But the judge, I wonder if the judge will read the letters aloud. Is that how they do it? He doesn't have to, though, does he? Because it's really just to him. I'm just picking on you, Cher. Settle down. Cass, did I catch the live? We are live, Cass.
Oh, wrong courtroom.
She ain't more than that, Tony. I am mean tonight.
There we go.
All right, let's get to it, people.
It's the same letter.
I think we're all on the same page then as far as information coming into this hearing. As a statutory question, Attorney Vera, is there any reason we should not now proceed to a sentencing hearing?
No, Your Honor.
Very good. Attorney Brown, are there any victim statements being made here in court today?
No victims themselves are going to speak. What we're going to do is Ms. Raymond's going to speak for conclude our arguments.
Very good. Why don't you proceed, please?
So, Your Honor, Mr. Brown and I are breaking up the sentencing. I'm going to talk very briefly about the character of the defendant and then go on to talk about the seriousness of the offense. Mr. Brown will then talk about second half of the seriousness offense and the need to protect the public. I'm going to spend a lot of my time today talking about the victims and who they were as people. But I am going to start with talking about the character of the defendant. This PSI was kind of not your average PSI. I've often is one of the most depressing things about my job, and that I really dislike it. Although what it does provide is a context to crime. Almost every homicide I've prosecuted, there's been a fairly tragic backstory of the defendant. Violence, drugs, just tragedy. And you often are left with an explanation, not an excuse, but an explanation as to why a crime occurred. Why did this 18-year-old kill a 17-year-old? Chandler grew up with a life of privilege by pretty much, I think, any sort of angle you look at it. He had two parents that were married and that seemed to be happily married. Two parents that from all evidence were completely supportive. Very sort of, his dad was the den leader for Boy Scouts. His parents attended every swim meet that he had. There's absolutely no evidence of abuse whatsoever in this case. Chandler grew up with no housing insecurities. He never had to wonder where his next meal was coming from. And he was never exposed to any violence that we saw any evidence of, or even really guns. The only tragedy, if you can even call it that, it's more really a part of life that we saw that occurred to him during his childhood was he did lose his maternal grandparents. He went to good and safe schools. By all accounts, he had a supportive extended family that saw him often and a large network of family friends that considered themselves his family. He had numerous people that would drop everything to help him if it was needed. He never faced any sort of discrimination that I can find from any source. By pretty much every measure, he was a white male who had a childhood of privilege. The only potential criticism that anyone that we talked to, and we've talked to well over 100 people, was that perhaps his mother babied him a little too much or
Well,
was a
yeah.
little too doting.
Yeah.
As I often explain to my husband, that's what mothers do. It is out of this life of privilege, this childhood, that was nearly ideal that he committed these crimes. It's also worth noting that these crimes were committed against these two individuals that provided this ideal childhood for him, the two people that took care of him. I only want to say one other thing about the character of the defendant. We certainly spent a lot of time in trial, and I don't need to belabor any points about that. But I do think it's worth noting that in all of the jail calls and messages that the detectives and Mr. Brown and I listened to, there was never even a moment where Chandler mourned his parents' death. I found that really unique. I've prosecuted a lot of cases where somebody has killed a family member, sometimes even a family member who was highly abusive to them. And there's mourning there. There's some sort of notion that they miss this person. It was interesting. In one message, somebody had told him that they just got back from his parents' memorial service and they were sad. He suggested that they watch a slasher movie, Halloween. There was no discussion of who was at the memorial service, what they talked about, who they saw, any remembering of his parents. I just think it's notable to bring up that how significant losing your parents is to a person's life and how much it impacts them. It impacts someone, and there's been no comment, no tears. And I just think that that is worth noting. You know, certainly you could take that in a couple of different ways. You could say, well, maybe they're just not an emotional person. That's certainly possible, but it also suggests a certain amount of callousness and perhaps even lack of remorse that is worth noting. So I'm going to spend the bulk of my time talking about the seriousness of the offense. And part of what that entails is the fact that this world no longer has Bart and Krista Halderson. And so I think it's an important part and to reflect on who they are. I'm going to start that by reading two victim impact statements. One was submitted to you earlier, but they asked that I read it out loud. The other one has not been submitted yet. It was just written today, I believe. The first victim impact statement is submitted by CAN, who's the future daughter-in-law to Bart and Krista Halderson. She's engaged to their son, Mitchell. She writes, "My life will be forever changed by the actions that occurred the week of July 1st through July 7th of 2021. I've lost my future mother and father-in-law in such a senseless and brutal way. This loss will remain with me for the rest of my life. I've personally have been deeply impacted by this loss. My mental and physical health have suffered tremendously. As Mitchell and I move forward planning our wedding, each decision we make comes with a reminder of two of the most important people to us, Bart and Krista, will not be there to celebrate this special occasion with us. I've cried about their loss on multiple occasions and will continue to mourn and cry many more times. I've experienced a lot of weight loss as I was unable to eat due to the high level of stress, anxiety, and uncertainty surrounding what had happened to Bart and Krista over that long period of time. I missed work for over a month, and even now that I'm back, there are times I struggle to make it through the day. Bart and Krista were amazing people. They were there to help everyone and anyone with whatever they could. Krista had always been so welcoming to me. From the first time I met her in 2014 for Christmas to the morning that we both called her and Bart to tell them the good news that Mitchell and I were engaged in 2020, to the afternoon we spent at their home for Father's Day in June of 2021, just a week before they were killed. Krista was excited to talk with me and always made me feel at home. Bart had a wonderful sense of humor and was a great handyman. He helped us set up many things when we moved into our new home and helped teach us so that we could do it on our own next time. I miss their warm presence and their kind hearts every single day. Both Bart and Krista had so much to look forward to that they will never get to experience. They will never get to see their son get married or start a family. Mitchell and I will miss them terribly during these milestones. Holding their grandchildren, watching them play sports, hearing about school, and all those things that Bart and Krista were so excited for, they will never get to do. They loved going to wineries, breweries, concerts on the square, the farmers market, and had been dreaming about many different trips to explore Wisconsin and the United States. But again, due to their senseless murders, they will never get to experience these things. We are comforted in knowing that Chandler cannot physically hurt us. However, if he was given the opportunity for parole, I would be terrified for Mitchell and my family's safety. Given the fact that he was capable of such calculated and horrific act of murder, I do not believe my family would be safe if he were ever to be released from prison. For this reason, I believe he should not be given the chance for parole. Bart and Krista's murders have greatly impacted my life and the rest of the Halderson and Frater family lives as well. The second letter is from Kayleen Halderson, mother of Bart and Chandler's grandmother. Judge, these are my feelings about Chandler. He is my grandson. I love him even though what he did was horrific. I can't believe his parents would want him to be incarcerated for life. I'm hoping he will find a trade or a craft while there to become a productive and caring person. We hope the people in charge of that facility will feel someday he deserves a second chance in life with a possibility of parole. Chandler's grandma, Kayleen Halderson. So last week, I had the pleasure and the opportunity to meet with Krista's best friend of 38 years, Jane. And I just spoke to her very candidly. Tell me about Bart and Krista. And she shared some really interesting and I think important things. She shared that Krista was a staple in her life, a sister in every way except for biological. She was the aunt to her daughters. She described Krista Halderson as having a lightness about her, that when she'd walk into the room, you would just feel happier. She was bubbly. She was a helper, wanted to always fix people's problems. Krista was described by her boss at work as the work mom for everything. She was the person you went to if you needed Tylenol, a hug, or a pep talk. She listened to people and cared about people. She went out of her way to lift people up. She was the type of person that you would feel happier, that would make you feel happier after you talked to her. The title that was most important to Krista was that of mom. That was her identity. Being a mom was her purpose in life. She was the type of mom that had bins where she saved her kids' Legos for the grandchildren. She had meticulous bins in her basement, each one perfectly labeled with no dust on them, that were organized and labeled their awards, their Eagle Scout journey, and various paraphernalia and photos. Jane said Krista was a joy and a blessing. I not only talked to Jane about Bart Halderson, but also his family over the last several weeks. Bart was quieter. He worked hard and he provided for his family. He was up for quite a big promotion right before his murder. He liked the outdoors, nature, fishing, and his family. He was redoing and in the process of renovating his entire house, nearly down to the studs. He had recently built a brand new dining table made of pure wood, which he had hoped that they would use for the rest of their lives, celebrating the holidays with the grandkids. He was close with his older brother, Brett, and his parents, who are both still alive. Bart is described as generous, doing little things to take care of people. Jane pointed out that every time he was in Milwaukee, he would always take her daughters out when they were in college for a free meal with their Uncle Bart. One other thing that actually one of our detectives pointed out today is in the course of their employment, they read through a whole bunch of text messages from all sorts of people. And they were really struck about how nice Bart and Krista were. They really didn't say a bad word about anyone, not even to each other. They were kind, respectful. They texted often about worrying about this son or that son and various things. They were loving towards each other. Bart and Krista, of course, will now not see their older son get married. They won't be present for their grandchildren. They won't get to experience the retirement that they really had been planning for decades. And they didn't get to say goodbye to anyone. Multiple people, when we talked to them about Bart and Krista, said, you know, if they would have found out about Chandler's lies and his deception, they would have been upset. They would have been. But they also would have worked with him to get him back on the right track. They were sure of this. More than one person had made a statement like this to us, that Bart and Krista would have continued to be the supportive parents that their entire track record had showed that they were. I just want to point out one more thing about the seriousness of the offense. The victimization that was caused here extends well beyond Bart and Krista Halderson. Because of Chandler's actions, his grandparents had to bury a child. His brother lost his entire nuclear family overnight. The entire family is forever altered. People who were generous to Chandler, such as his girlfriend and her family, have had their lives completely uprooted as well. Bart and Krista's friends will again never get to enjoy them. And numerous people have guilt because they wonder, were there red flags that I missed? Could I have prevented this? Chandler's actions have caused uncalculable amounts of trauma for dozens of people. Your Honor, as you craft a sentence, I'm asking that you please consider all this trauma as part of the seriousness of this offense in creating a just sentence.
I'm going to comment on some of the other sentencing factors. I'm going to start with the submission by the defense, which I thought was well put together and well written, and included an article, a law review article that I read with great interest. Obviously, it concerns what I do for a living, and it's something I should think about. One thing that, before I start, I do want to thank both the defense attorneys. I think they've done a hard job, a job that they've sworn to do and dedicated their lives to doing as being defense attorneys and public defenders. And I've appreciated their presence, and they've been nothing but respectful and honorable in their task. And it was a hard job in this case. But speaking especially to their submission today, Attorney Dorrell said something that stuck out to me is absolutely true, which is one of the lines, which is, it seems
Okay,
that
I heard
people,
it.
I'm quoting, paraphrasing here, believe that today is a foregone conclusion as to what the outcome is. And I, like her, I don't know that that's true. And I certainly don't think it's true with you, Judge. I'll tell you that as a prosecutor, I often prosecute homicides. And that's an unfortunate reality of being a prosecutor in a city. People commit the crime of an intentional homicide. These hearings happen a great deal. My job is obviously to convict people if I believe they're guilty. And here, obviously, of course, I believe that, and I did that. But when it comes to sentencing, the questions are not simply in my gut. Do I feel like this is a bad guy? Do I personally have some vendetta or reason to want to push for a specific sentence? My role is to examine the legal factors and to employ my role as the executive branch's representative in these hearings as thoughtfully and as compassionately as I can. I have to recognize, and I think all prosecutors should recognize as the representative of the executive branch at a sentencing, especially a sentencing in which we're talking about an imprisonment of the defendant that could be many decades, that nothing should be a foregone conclusion, that we should approach this with a level of analysis and questioning and of skepticism that we do some of the most important questions in our lives, professionally or personally. And I'll tell you and Mr. Halderson and the community that I've done that. I've thought a great deal, as has Ms. Raymond, as have the detectives. Mr. Halderson's being sentenced to life in prison today. This hearing is about whether he's ever going to be granted parole or eligible for parole, excuse me. And that's a challenging decision for everyone to make. And I'll let you know that I have not entered this process in thinking about what the state's recommendation should be, with that being a foregone conclusion. Luckily, the law tells me what I'm supposed to think about when I'm considering what the executive branch of government is going to represent as its opinion in this case. It tells me that I should consider the gravity of the offense, the need to protect the public, and the rehabilitative needs of Mr. Halderson, amongst other factors, mitigating factors and things of that sort. But those are the three that generally are focused upon. They're called the galleon factors here in Wisconsin. That's supposed to guide us in our thought process. And I'll walk through those and my thought process in making my recommendation. I'll start with the rehabilitative needs of Mr. Halderson. I have no idea what they are. Mr. Halderson has an absolute right to not participate in these proceedings, and he is not being sentenced today. And I'm not asking you to sentence him based on his non-participation in either the PSI or a trial. Of course, those are his constitutional rights, or even today. That being said, as Ms. Raymond said, almost always in a sentencing hearing for a homicide or even lesser crimes, we have some understanding as players in the criminal justice system of the underlying causes of someone's problems, the root causes. Frequently, it's substance abuse. Frequently, it's mental illness. Frequently, it's inability to control anger and other behavioral problems that have manifested themselves throughout someone's life. You probably are wondering, and I'll tell you, it's been thoroughly investigated of whether there were any red flags that anyone missed. Was Mr. Halderson engaged in bad behavior as a youth? Was he harming animals? Was he harming people? None of that is true that we can tell. He seemed to be a pretty normal kid with a pretty normal life who did a pretty abnormal thing as he turned 23. You don't know what his rehabilitative needs are, and that's a challenge. The reason we focus on that is this idea in the criminal justice system that we can rehabilitate almost everyone. And I'll say, I think that to be true. I really do. The vast majority of people who are charged with this crime of first-degree intentional homicide, as grievous as it might be and as difficult as it might be sometimes for the victims to hear it, they are people who can be rehabilitated, that we can address that root underlying cause of mental illness or substance abuse, and they can emerge from the state prison system, perhaps not a perfect person, but a better person. And society can have some comfort, and we can all go to bed at night and sleep soundly knowing that we've done what we can to try to prevent some future harm from occurring because we've addressed that identifiable problem. You don't have that. And if you don't have that, I'm not sure how much you can consider that factor. And the law is very clear. When you're addressing the galleon factors, you don't have to weigh them up equally. You have to consider them all. But I would pose to the court that that's not a factor that you should ultimately consider a great deal, because I don't know what information the court could rely on in determining that there are some identifiable and fixable rehabilitative needs of Mr. Halderson. Next, the court has to consider the protection of the public. And here's where the court has to probably give a great weight to this factor. Mr. Halderson, by all accounts, chose to commit the crime of first-degree intentional homicide twice on a single day because he was caught lying about where he was working and going to school, or perhaps just where he was going to school. It was uncomfortable, probably, that he was caught. It probably wasn't an experience he was looking forward to in dealing with the repercussions of that. But those kind of inconveniences and uncomfortable situations are constantly present in life. Every one of us in this courtroom have dealt with bad situations in life. Every one of us have left work one day thinking, man, I really don't want to go home tonight because I did something and I'm going to have to talk about it. Every one of us here has probably walked into work one day thinking, boy, I don't really want to walk into my supervisor's office and got to talk about that. Life is full of inconveniences. Life is full of being uncomfortable. The difference between everyone else in this room and Mr. Halderson is all of us have owned up to that. All of us walked into those rooms, walked into our front door. All of us have addressed those situations, whether it be comfortable or uncomfortable, whether it lead to the loss of relationships or respect or money. We've all addressed them. You walk in, You take your lumps, you leave. But when faced with, in the grand scheme of things, a minor inconvenience in his life, Mr. Halderson chose to commit the crime of first-degree intentional homicide 2 times. And then over the course of several days, chose to cut up those people's bodies and spread them around the state. Chose to lie to the police, concoct a bizarre story, lead his family down this road of believing that there was just some hope somewhere out there that Bart and Krista were alive. Because he got caught in a minor inconvenience. I don't know how you protect the public from someone like that. I don't know how any of us would have any comfort in thinking that Mr. Halderson would ever be in a better place to make those decisions more wisely. It's even more compounded and perhaps aggravated in the legal sense by the fact that no one saw this coming. He is someone who was able to perhaps have this capability or perhaps have these thoughts in life and insert himself into relationships, social situations, his family, without anyone wondering, is this a safe person to be around? Sometimes in court for homicide sentencings, the guy next to us is a history a mile long of violent crime and is willing to talk about it. And you wonder when people are even around that person. Seems like a dangerous guy. Part of the risk of Chandler is he doesn't look like a dangerous guy. He's packaged up into like a normal middle-class kid.
You know what they say about the quiet
was
ones.
able to fool everyone. Not only fool everyone about these crazy lies about work and school and activities, but fool everyone into believing that he was a safe person to be around, that he was trustworthy, that he wasn't going to, not exaggerating the facts, shoot you in the back, because that's in fact what happened. Someone in Mr. Halderson's shoes with his mindset can never be safely in this community. His willingness to solve the minor inconveniences of life with brutal violence can never be mitigated in our community. As long as he breathes, he will be a risk. He will be a risk because he will suffer more minor inconveniences, as will we all. And lastly, the court has to consider the gravity of the offense. Ms. Raymond talked a good deal about that. Part of that is considering the people he hurt. Not only his parents, who by all accounts were loving and caring, but the community, their character as people. Gravity of the offense is sometimes called retribution in some systems, and I'll note that retribution is an appropriate thing to consider in law. At times, it's part of the gravity of the offense, but here there is no more grave offense. The crime of first-degree intentional homicide is as serious as it gets. Committing it twice is even more serious, and committing it against the people who are you're supposed to love the most is beyond comprehension for many in our community. There's an interesting quote as I prepared for today. I was looking at some cases, just trying to look into the mindset of other judges as they've considered these factors and the concept of punishment in the law. Justice Stewart, a while back in Furman versus Georgia, wrote, "The instinct for retribution is part of the nature of man, and channeling that instinct in the administration of criminal justice serves an important purpose in promoting the stability of a society governed by law." There was another case in the late 40s. It was Williams versus New York. Retribution is no longer the dominant objective of criminal law, but it is neither forbidden nor one inconsistent with our respect for the dignity of man. When we talk about the gravity of the offense, it's a consideration. The court gets to decide what that means. But you should consider that in my mind, in my experience as a prosecutor in this county, as a citizen of this state, I've never heard of a crime more serious. I've never heard of a crime more brutal. Mr. Halderson's mere presence in our community, the fact that he did any of this, has ripped apart the fabric of our community. The idea that someone can live amongst us with no warning signs and commit such heinous acts should scare everybody, and it sure as hell scared everybody here. No one who's interacted with Mr. Halderson will ever be the same. For whatever reason he decided to do it, whatever justification he can come up with in his own mind, whether it be today or down the road in many years, nothing will ever explain it. His actions in July of this year were evil. And for this generation and at this time, Mr. Halderson is the personification of evil in our community. He can work the rest of his life at trying to earn back the respect and trust and love of maybe some of his family, and I hope he does that. But that's a different thing than what's going on here today. Our question is whether Mr. Halderson should ever be released from prison, and if so, when should he have that opportunity to ask? It's my position that he should never be released from prison. That the mere possibility of his return to our community would shock the conscience of almost every citizen of this community. It would depreciate the seriousness of what he's done. It would cause extreme angst, animosity, probably for many, to even feel that that's a possibility. We don't have a more serious punishment, but sometimes it's appropriate. And in this case, it's the state's position, it is my position, it is my recommendation that Mr. Halderson spend the remainder of his life in prison, that he not be eligible for parole at any point. Again, there is no more serious crime. Mr. Halderson has to come to terms with what he's done, and I hope he does someday. But that doesn't mean he should ever be released. And I ask that you not let him be released. Thank you.
He is so well spoken. I really
Were any
like him.
statements being made beyond counsel's regarding the sentencing here on Mr. Halderson's behalf?
No, Your Honor.
Then would you be speaking on this regard?
I will, yes.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Earlier this week, Attorney Doral did file a sentencing memorandum, which we know Your Honor has read and considered. We stand by that submission, and we just have a couple more additions to add right now. We've talked about family and the seriousness of this case and the public. And sentencing is a very intimate matter, especially in a case like this where it is a family situation. I bring that up because at the end of the day, regardless of what happens today in this courtroom, no one is going to be happy. No one is going to run out of this courtroom feeling like justice is served. No one is going to run out of this courtroom feeling good. This family is going to always have this situation, is going to be touched by this situation. And Chandler himself is always going to be touched by this moment, which makes it a very intimate matter.
Poor him.
But it
really?
also has become a very public affair.
Well, he did
Regardless of what you do today, the outside world, the community, the public, however you want to address it, is going to be not happy. There are going to be people that, if you decide to sentence Chandler to life without parole, they're still going to be mad. They're going to ask for Wisconsin to bring the death penalty back and to apply it retroactively to him. And if you sentence him without or with parole, there are people that are going to be mad because it's too lenient. I bring this up because, again, it's what happens here today is not a win-win or a lose-lose situation. It is what it is, and it's difficult. What I do want to focus on today is just what we're asking for, which we are asking for the possibility of parole. And I want to stress that it is a possibility. It is not a guarantee. It is not something that is going to happen, even if Your Honor says today that there's a possibility that it could happen. According to the statute, 302.114 of the Wisconsin statutes, it's a process. If Your Honor finds him eligible for parole today, he would have to go through this process that can start no earlier than 90 days before the eligibility date. It's a process that would require a petition to the court. It would perhaps be Your Honor or someone else, but it would be a court petition. It would be something submitted to the district attorney's office as well. They are allowed to give their 2 cents on whether it should be granted or it should not be granted. Your Honor is allowed to make the decision on its face if it's going to grant parole or not. There's the opportunity for victims and those impacted by this case to give their 2 cents as well. There's an opportunity for a hearing where at that point, Mr. Halderson would have to show that he is worthy of parole. Not only that, but it's not a situation where he can continue to apply and apply. Your Honor, whoever the court is at that time, would have the opportunity to say, you're not allowed to apply anymore. I'm going to give you one more chance. I'm going to give you two more chances. It's not something that he would have to continue to ask for year after this eligibility date, should Your Honor grant it. So it's not a process that is a guarantee. It is simply a process that we are asking that you allow for the possibility of that process happening. And I cannot stress that enough. I cannot stress enough how all we are asking for today is for the possibility of this man to show you that he is redeemable. Attorney Brown brought up points about rehabilitation and how and everything that we've seen. And yes, there was a lot of evidence and a lot of discovery in this case. There may not be something to point out right away that is quote unquote a rehabilitative process. There isn't any kind of substance abuse issue, none of that. But to be perfectly fair, and whether you want to call him a kid, a young man, a young adult, Chandler is young. He just turned 24. There are a lot of growing up. There's a lot of adulting that he's going to miss out on, that he's going to have to do in the institution, that ultimately is going to affect who he becomes in the future. Most of us get the opportunity to do that around our family, with our community, whatever it is. And he's going to have to do that in custody. But I bring that up because there's certain things about my own childhood, about my own life that I didn't really understand until I was later in my late 20s. That affected how I was as a person in my early 20s. So it's easy to come up now and say that there's no rehabilitation that's needed here, but we just don't know that. So ultimately, it boils down to what Your Honor believes is an appropriate, fair, and just option, given everything, given all the galleon factors that the state has mentioned and that we have mentioned in our sentencing memorandum. And it's a delicate balance. If Your Honor believes that sentencing is purely punitive, purely an issue of punishment, then the only option is life without parole. But if Your Honor believes that it is a delicate combination of punishment and rehabilitation, redemption, if you will, then there's only one option, and that is the option of life with parole. As far as when that eligibility comes to play, we leave that up to Your Honor. You know the case, you've been here with the trial. That date we leave up to you. But we are asking that you do provide Chandler with the opportunity to show to Your Honor that he is redeemable in the future. And that's all we're asking for today, life with parole. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that in your memorandum, there was an indication once again that Mr. Halderson would not exercise his right to elocute at this hearing. Obviously, just as with trial, it comes up to a decision at the very last minute. I just want to ensure at this moment whether or not Mr. Halderson wishes to make a statement.
And thank you for doing that. That has changed. Mr. Halderson would like to give a statement to Your Honor.
You may remove your mask if you wish. I believe the conditions in the jail are and very good as far as the pandemic. So if you want to speak without your mask, and Attorney Dorrell's comfortable with that, you could.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I would only ask that you read slowly, simply because my court reporter has to take down.
Oh, he had to write it down.
And sometimes we read faster than we mean to.
Your Honor, I want to take this opportunity to state my intent to appeal my conviction. If there are any lawyers listening and willing to take on my appeal, take a moment to please reach out to me. It's not that I do not have feelings. It's that I was warned to not show them due to the scrutiny of this case. Thank you.
Bullshit.
Thank you.
I'm calling BS.
The
That's all you got to say, you piece of
court
crap.
always tends to make a number of observations at sentencing hearings that are contested and which carry a good deal of weight. And I'm not going to depart from that process today. I first think it's important to acknowledge that the trial and the process within this case that brings us here today was the united effort of a number of people. And first and foremost, I want to recognize again the jurors, but not just those 12 people that rendered the verdicts here, but those alternates, those people that responded to the summons, especially given the time of year that this occurred, and the concerns that were rife regarding individual health. We, as by necessity, inconvenienced a number of citizens, and in the end, when I spoke to them, they had no regrets about their service. And that is because they understood that under our system, that is vital. And they understood that they had a duty to perform once selected. So I thank them once again. I want to thank the bailiff staff who, throughout those weeks of trial, worked incredibly well in assisting the parties, the court, the witnesses, and the media. I want to thank the prosecution because I thought that the case that they presented was done efficiently, economically, but most importantly, with due deference to the nature of the evidence and the need to present that evidence in a manner which honored the people who were lost. We had a number of lay witnesses that came to court to testify. I assume that they all would rather have been somewhere else, but they all came willingly and testified here, and I appreciated their participation and the time that it took for them, again, under the circumstances, both as far as health and the nature of the proceedings and their testimony. Counsel mentioned that this crime caused a rip in our community. If there's one thing that's a positive coming out of this, I think that it is a demonstration to our community of the pride we should feel in our law enforcement, the pride we should feel in how they investigated this case and how they presented the evidence in this case. It was, well, I honestly think it put Dane County on the map through both the Justice Department efforts and the efforts of our local sheriff's department and other law enforcement agencies involved. It was quite incredible. I also want to finally say something about the fact that at every trial, just about, I hear defense attorneys speaking to jurors in voir dire about the fact that the defendant has a right to a trial. The defendant does not have to prove anything. The defendant does not have to testify. Sometimes the counsel will go to the extent of saying, we don't have to do anything. It's the state's burden. It's the state's responsibility to carry the case forward, to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And you should find the defendant not guilty if you believe they failed in that. Attorneys Doral and Vera carried out their constitutional duty in this case efficiently. And I don't want to say too much more because of mention already about questions about the review of what they did in representing Mr. Halderson. But I wouldn't be remiss if I did not say that their actions, and I agree with Mr. Brown in this respect, that their actions at trial advanced Mr. Halderson's constitutional right to require the state to prove its case, and did so in a professional and efficient manner such that I find that they served their role in this process admirably.
Was he crying?
I'm very passionate about our system. And so let me move on to the points in this proceeding at which I need to be dispassionate. And I need to be dispassionate because as the person sitting in judgment, I have to try and achieve a proper analysis of the sentencing goals based upon the information and evidence put forward and what the legislature has determined to be the appropriate sentences, at least as far as maximums, mandatory minimums, if any, and here, obviously, as addressed by everyone, the determination of whether there should be any eligibility for parole in the future. Technically extended supervision, but it's easier just to say parole. I've had the benefit of observing everything at the trial, whether it occurred before the jury or not. I've had the benefit of reviewing all the pre-trial submissions by the parties. I've had the benefit of the pre-sentence investigation and the materials submitted by victims, orally by the state in writing, by the defense, and orally here today. And Mr. Halderson has exercised his constitutional right as well. I don't know the victims. I did not know the victims. I know people like them, I'm privileged to say, and I know and can understand the empty space that this crime has left. I can empathize. I can only partially understand the feelings because I haven't lost people in my family through such a manner, or had a violation by a member of the family causing such loss. But everyone in this room has a mother and a father. Everyone has siblings, if they're fortunate, and everyone can understand the loss that the Halderson family, extended as it is, and their friends and this community feel for their loss. It is tragic. It is tragic. It is something which will take decades for some to heal. I hope not that long, but healing may never come for some. One does not know. And I hope that no one is coming here for that healing. This procedure provides closure only of this legal part of the matter. What people can do in their own lives to address their loss is what they must do themselves and amongst others. But I do want you to know that this court honors your loss, honors the people who died, and approaches this sentencing here, weighing that gravity of that offense as one of those things which must be weighed in determining whether or not Mr. Halderson should ever be eligible for parole, as the life sentences I must impose are predetermined by the legislature. It is true that rehabilitation is a factor that must be considered, and Attorney Brown's point is well noted, that I'm not certain that anyone has identified rehabilitative needs, but those may arise over time, depending upon an individual's receptiveness and willingness to participate in self-examination or diagnosis or other steps which our criminal justice system utilizes to try and determine how to fix something, whether it's a substance abuse issue or an anger issue or something that is only amenable to treatment by medication or intensive therapy.
Lazy can't be fixed.
Some people, I believe, can't be fixed. I have no basis to know whether Mr. Halderson fits into any of those categories, other than I think it's fairly clear here that nothing was identified in his 23, 24 years of life up to this point, except for his actions in July. And to an extent, his actions over the year plus leading up to that, where he was deceiving his family and his friends. The gravity of the offense is as serious as it could be, and I must not overlook, of course, the steps taken to hide the crime. The steps taken which, if one ponders it, certainly makes the crime even worse. If you could say that the murder of your parents is something that could be made worse. I've tried even though I've had to examine carefully the evidence, not to think about it. I've tried not to think about how or what steps were taken or how these things even took place. I don't wish to engage in that speculation at sentencing, but I recognize that the jury found Mr. Halderson guilty of mutilating both bodies, hiding both bodies, and presenting a story to law enforcement to try and lead them on a completely different path than what had actually occurred. And that he took steps in those actions which really robbed those people of dignity. But fortunately, their dignity is in whole here in these people that remember them, these people that are here today because of them. I appreciated learning more about them, and my condolences go to every member of their family. There's no foregone conclusions in sentencing. I've learned that since my time on the bench. I've learned that each case is different. Each case demands an individual examination. And sometimes I will confess I sit down not knowing what I'm going to do or not even certain which direction I'm leading. So I appreciate all of the statements made by counsel here and in writing, recognizing that the determination doesn't come until this point and nothing is foregone as far as a conclusion. This is the third individual for which I've had to make this determination. And similar to ADA Raymond's comments, I've had to sentence a host of other people up to this crime, where you can observe a lot in the background of the individual that you end up wishing hadn't been the case, because they might not have come to the point if they had had a better foundation. It is to Bart and Krista's credit the foundation Mr. Halderson enjoyed. And it does not explain what happened here. And as everyone has discussed, there may be the ability to have rehabilitation throughout some course of time. And that's why the defense requests that that be kept in mind as to the determination of eligibility for parole. But in all honesty, I must say that as a wiser judge indicated to me once, you should sentence people not because of your anger, if indeed you're fearful of them, and not utilize the same standards for both. I cannot conceive of a way to fulfill my duty to protect the public that I serve were I to perceive that at some point in time, an individual who committed these crimes should be released back into that public. I cannot grant to Mr. Halderson the generosity of spirit and empathy that his grandmother has for him. Empathy which his own parents would surely have had, where he just owned up to what he had deceived them about. I cannot say to the community here in this room or at large in this county that Mr. Halderson should have the ability to be reviewed and considered for release back into our community at any point, despite his young age at this point in his life. The gravity of these offenses and the need to protect the public outweigh the potential that there could be that at some future point he should have presence among us. Now, that is not to say that he may not have the possibility of presence as a member of his family in the future. That is up to those folks and he, and that's mentioned in the defense memorandum regarding a hope that someday there might be a reconstruction of a relationship. That's all well and good. I would wish that for anyone, because I don't like telling his grandmother that I'm not able to give her the relief that she's asking for here out of her love for her grandson. I cannot do that. I have to, for this sentence, ensure that the only time Mr. Halderson comes back into the community is to have the privilege of a burial that he denied his parents. And so on
Ooh.
counts 1 and 5,
Dang.
per statute, I sentence him to life in prison, and pursuant to section 973.014 sub 1G3, I find that he is not.
Oh, his mic went off.
Rather superfluous, to say the least, but at the same time, I absolutely acknowledge that we may be in a completely different position here had he committed the acts of homicide, but then stopped and took other steps to accept responsibility and sought forgiveness of everyone. Because what happens with a weapon in a moment of panic is different than what happened over those 48 to 72 hours. The events of which I don't wish to think of or consider once again, having listened to the evidence and observed the testimony and the physical evidence. So to make this quite simple, I will impose maximum terms concurrent to each other and concurrent to counts 1 and 5 on each of the other counts within the information of which the verdict convicted Mr. Halderson. I do believe that by imposing the maximum, I'm recognizing the severity of those individual acts, but there is a life sentence here, so making them consecutive does not undermine the gravity of that, given the maximum penalty involved. I determined, by my calculation, 253 days of credit that the judgment of conviction would reflect from July 8th, 2021 until yesterday's date. And I will waive the court cost assessments and surcharges on each count based upon indigence, the balance on each of the victim witness fee to be payable during the course of his confinement. Is there any restitution being sought?
No, Your Honor.
Then I will enter an order for zero restitution at this time. I don't have to address conditions of extended supervision, except to the point that there's an extended supervision component of the sentences on the other counts. So I would adopt the recommendations of the department on page 24 of the pre-sentence as to those. Although I recognize that extended supervision is denied under this sentence, so that point is moot. Attorney Brown or Raymond, did I overlook anything in passing judgment?
No.
Attorney Vera or Doral, did I overlook anything other than addressing post-conviction?
No.
Mr. Halderson, you have the absolute right to seek an appeal. You have 20 days within which to start that process. That's through filing a notice of intent. I believe that we have on file the notice that you understand and have been given notice of that right, and most importantly, of that deadline. Your signature's on that document. That'll be placed within the file here. I thank everyone for being here today. We are adjourned. Thank you.
There you have it, folks. Let's flip back over really quick. I wanted you guys to see something else. Bye, Chandler. Have a great life in prison. I want to watch this.
A year after being convicted of killing his parents, Chandler Halderson was once again in court. Today, 2 of those convictions were vacated. Armand Rahman is here to explain why and how this would affect his sentence. Armand?
Eric, the long and short of it is it doesn't change anything. He's still serving a life sentence for the 2021 murders of his parents. A Dane County judge says 2 of the 8.
That's one.
New at noon, Chandler Halderson, who last year was found guilty of murdering his parents, is appealing his conviction. Online court records show Halderson's attorney filed a notice of appeal yesterday. Halderson was found guilty on all 8 charges against him, including mutilating and hiding a corpse. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Head to channel3000.com to watch our extensive coverage of the case and every moment of the trial.
Now, we very rarely heard from the defense in this case. Their opening statements, only about 10 minutes. Closing argument, about 30. And they didn't have Halderson take the stand in his own defense and did not call any witnesses. We spoke to a local defense attorney about that strategy.
So it's probably a bit unusual, but certainly not unheard of when what you're talking about is a case where you're essentially arguing burden of proof, which is what the argument was here. In cases where there's an affirmative defense, and I've been on talking about other cases where, self-defense was an issue, there you expect to see witnesses because there's an alternative version of events to discuss. When you're talking about a case where the argument is there's just not enough evidence here, there aren't very many witnesses that you can really call to support that because simply by calling them, you're adding to the evidence.
And when it comes to Halderson not taking the stand, she says she has never been less surprised to see a defendant not testify. If you want to get a refresher on how we got to this point in the trial, we have a page dedicated to it at channel3000.com/Halderson. You can watch every minute of the trial from the very beginning and a day-to-day breakdown of the proceedings and testimony. And as always, so get ready for the sentencing in March. Be sure to stay with News.
I bet they
Be sure to stay with News 3 Now and channel3000.com
because they keep promoting their channel. Well, that will wrap it up, everyone, of our coverage of the Chandler Halderson trial. We got another one in the books, our second one. So, what's coming up next on my channel, you ask? Because I did hear you ask. Y'all don't care. Y'all just chat. Y'all don't even pay attention to what I'm doing. Seriously. Well, on the 18th at 9 a.m., we will be here together to see what happens with Darrell Brooks' status hearing. I would imagine since it's another hearing, they're not going to show it again. But if they show it once again, we will be here. So join me. We'll find something to watch. I'll do something Brooks that day. As much as I don't want to do any more of him. I'll do something for y'all on that day. Sarah Boone has her pretrial on Tuesday at 8 a.m. I don't really know if we're going to have anything on that. I might do like a video on it or something just to kind of update you guys. But the trial for Jennifer and James Crumbley starts on the 23rd. And that's the one, the Oxford school shooter, Ethan Crumbley, he did end up getting sentenced. And he's gone away for life. But, yeah. But what I really want to focus on, and then on the 29th, Sarah Boone's trial starts at 8 a.m. So I do want to do her trial. But I don't think we're going to do like a full trial, like to follow another trial that's live until we get to Sarah Boone on the 29th. So the rest of this month, I'm just going to come on and we'll watch some of these Judge Tammy antics. I've been working on those clips and she's so funny. Not just funny, I love her. She's awesome. So I think a lot of you guys like her too. So we're going to stick with her for a little while and we'll go from there. So that's the game plan. I hope you guys can stick around for it. Hey, Shonda. And I appreciate you guys being with me again tonight. You guys are so loyal. And I appreciate you sticking with me through this trial because I know not everyone was crazy about this trial, but I appreciate you being here. So you guys have a blessed evening and I will see you again soon. May not be tomorrow. Maybe what's tomorrow? Friday? Is tomorrow Friday? Yeah. I might see y'all Saturday, but I might see you tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to do. I just don't know. I haven't decided yet. It's too far in advance. We'll see how my editing goes. All right, guys, y'all be good. Stay well, and we'll talk soon.